everyone, and welcome to episode 99.5 of the Retrospectives podcast, Mailbag 4. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, it's an absolute delight to be with you here for our fourth Mailbag episode. These are far and away some of my favorite episodes, and I'm glad that the show has survived long enough for us to get to the fourth one.
Yeah, and I'm glad so many people have sent in questions for this one too. I feel like the questions get better and better every year, so we're really glad for all of them to come through, and I'm really glad to have some time off to not actually have to play through a game over the Christmas break. It's a bit refreshing after doing so all year long.
Yeah, the time saved is definitely appreciated, and it's just fun to get out of our usual wheelhouse, because I still think we'll be bringing our usual perspective to these mailbag questions, but we get to talk about, I guess, a lot of the things that influence our perspectives through the lens of these questions. And I agree with James, these questions are bloody fantastic. It was a lot of fun writing the answers for them, and I spent several hours doing so. So I hope we won't disappoint in our answers to these delightful questions tonight.
Yeah, I do say time saved, but what that really means is it's like 3 or 4 hours instead of like 18.
Yeah, so a big thank you to our Discord community for submitting all these questions. Honest to God, this is why we do the podcast in a lot of ways. We do it obviously because it's nice to have a soapbox to talk from, but it's even better to know that we're being heard. And this Discord community, to me, is one of the best things to come from our podcast, and we really appreciate everyone who's joined, and even more so the ones who ask the questions. James, I'm rearing to go. Do you want to just jump right into this?
We need to explain the show to people who have never listened. Let's skip that. If you're starting this episode on Mailbag, if you're starting listening to us on Mailbag 4, I don't know what to tell you, but thank you.
Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the assorted ramblings that we're going to be getting into. So what I've done is I've grouped these questions by person who asked them, so I had to do a bit of chopping and changing. We've grouped a couple of questions together that were very similar, and I have cut one or two questions just in the interest of time. We had specifically Mayday Mima, one of our longtime listeners, asked something like 6 questions. I think we've cut it down to 3 or 4 just to make sure it's nice and balanced. But
Patrick wanted to cut the really long one, and I said no. I spent the effort on that one, so he has to too.
We'll be getting to that in a second, but yeah, James, that's going to be a solo answer by James, because I definitely did not prepare for this one. We're going to be starting with Mayday Mima. He was the first one to ask a question, so I'm just going to go through all of the questions he's asked. We'll ask them one by one, and then we'll move on to the next listener questions. So the first one is, what modern games would you play for the pod if they were retro? We also had one of our newer listeners, Hodor Gorgon, ask, you guys have done a couple of newer games over the years. Would you consider doing an episode every so often of a new game you've been looking forward to playing? So I just grouped these two together because they seemed a bit similar. James, how would you answer this question?
Well, for the second one, we already sort of are trying to do more modern games more regularly. We're doing Pathologic 2 next because we both... Well, the first one was really interesting to discuss, but I also would kind of like to do it more often than we have been, although, you kind of have to strike the balance of not doing it too much. As for the games that I would play right now for the show specifically, I have 4 answers for this question.
Someone overprepared. It's not a competition, James.
Yeah, so the first is Rain World, which I think we would both enjoy the misery of struggling through that game based on our experiences with like Resident Evil and Pathologic.
So James, can I just say I have one answer for this question, and that answer is Rain World.
Yeah. Everything I read about that game makes it sound like, it's like one of those games you really have to like persevere through and like learn how it works under the hood in order to survive. And that kind of thing, I feel like, there are a lot of people who say it's too hard or too bullshit or whatever. And I kind of like, that would be very fun to talk about and share the suffering on the show.
Yeah, I've heard that it's got like this living ecosystem and hierarchy of creatures that, feast on others.
Yes.
There's a real feeling of vulnerability for the player, but the player also has very high maneuverability. And a lot of the game is about outsmarting the intelligent AI instead of becoming strong enough to fight them head on. And I've
Yes.
even heard that the way the game has a story. I just found about this recently, and the way it slowly unfolds as you persevere and advance through the game is apparently really good as well. So this is one that I've been saving for a rainy day.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's very funny that it's the same game. But go on, James, hit us with your other three.
So I've mentioned this game on the show previously. The next one is Catherine. I think kind of block pushing visual novel style game would be it's very strange. There is no other game quite like that one. I think honestly, these days the games I value doing for the show more are the ones that spark interesting discussions that we haven't had before, not necessarily like this game is really popular and everyone loves it. It's like, yeah, but I've played all these games that do stuff like that before. We want to talk about new things,
Yeah,
have more heated arguments.
and I'd be up for doing more visual novels because we haven't really done much in this space. Like we've done Policenauts and
They're also
Ace
long.
Attorney. Those are the two we've done, right? There's no others.
We're gonna sit down for like 60 hours with some some real real jank. But I would be up for that too. And then the next one, SMT Strange Journey. I love 3DS dungeon crawlers, and that is one that I've had on my radar for a very long time. And then the final one is Factorio, which I think would be really fun to just.
Yeah, I've watched Mandalore's review of it, so I have a basic understanding of it. It does seem like the logical evolution of something like we've did Emperor: The Last Kingdom.
Yes.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like a modern take on the city management sim, if you will, although still different enough to have its own unique flavor, unlike some of the other ones, which are just kind of very similar.
It's like you've got this big equilibrium machine that you're trying to balance in this state of good while trying to make it bigger and bigger, right? That's like the nature of those games, right? Like it's balancing these resources and all of these external factors while trying to expand.
Yeah, not having to reset every mission, I think would be very enjoyable. Just constantly building up that sense of progression would be great.
Yes.
I think that's a good selection of games, James. I think, yeah, definitely Rainworld would be our number one. And maybe, I mean, just from how we've discussed it, probably our next one. Catherine, though, is one that does seem interesting as well. And I would like to dabble more in puzzles and visual novels. So I would say that one's on the radar as well. All right, next question, also from Mayday Mima. What game that you've played for the pod do you believe has fallen the most relative to its reputation it received at the time?
Oh, this one's easy.
I have two answers, so I'm sure one will be the same, but I have two answers.
So my first answer is GoldenEye.
Yep, that's one of mine.
Yep. My second one is King Kong. And then I had a third one with 2 stars next to it, because I don't think this game has aged poorly, but our opinions of it compared to other people's opinion of it is much lower, and that was Splinter Cell Chaos Theory.
Huh. See, I don't know. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, I think, has, if anything...
I think it's aged well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I was expecting to based on the hype.
It was certainly a surprise, and I think that a large part of that is that I guess what we wanted from the sequels to Splinter Cell is probably not what other people's wanted. Whereas we wanted an escalation in the challenge, it kind of went in the opposite direction in the favor of gimmicks.
I feel like we had the same thing with Resident Evil 4, but we were able to look past it.
I think for me, GoldenEye is definitely a great answer because that game is not very good. I do think it has some interesting aspects to it, but it's just not a very good game.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, like running around hip firing. We agreed on that. It weirdly feels nice to shoot things in that game, which I wasn't expecting. But man, level design and visuals and music, like everything's just like
terrible.
I really don't think it's good anymore.
And I liked its difficulty structure of having a set of objectives.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not that it has zero
Still
merit
an interesting game,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
The game I had is, which to me is probably my number one, is Another World. I think that is a game that is very much a game that was received insane acclaim at the time it was released. But if you give that video game to anyone to play it today, they're not even going to understand what's happening, despite it being remastered, 15 different times.
I think the like the rotoscope animation style makes it hold up. Like I feel like when it came out, rotoscoping gave you animation way better than most studios were capable of doing manually. So I think that aspect it holds up, and at least the remaster that we played still looks nice, I think. Gameplay wise, it's interesting because I kind of like want more games that, you know, like I feel like Another World and Ecstatica were both the same genre of dumping you into this world with awkward controls and hoping that you figure out how to move the story forward.
Yeah, I feel like Ecstatica at least was not too complicated to figure out what to do next, though. Another World had multiple moments in it where I felt like the logic required to try and solve some of those puzzles just drove me insane. I was really annoyed by that game. Everything in the middle of that game just drove me nuts. I tried so hard to not use it.
Does Ecstatica count as another answer? I don't know if it got that much reputation to begin with.
Yeah, I guess Another World felt very influential. I know that Hideo Kojima has cited it as one of his influences, and certainly I think it went on to inspire a lot of the cinematic genre of or the cinematic angle for video games. So in that sense, it was influential and highly revered. Certainly more than Ecstatica was at the time. But yeah, definitely. Once again, they're both interesting games with interesting elements to them, but they're not fun to play today. They stink, and I wouldn't recommend them to nearly anyone. Okay, so now we get to the question that Mayday Mima asked that I immediately was like, nah, we're going to skip this one. We're going to cull this one because it's too time consuming.
It's too time consuming. I did it, so Patrick has to now.
Okay, so the question is, what were the best games of each year since the year you were born? So he literally wanted us to research and recite 30 plus video games. So James, take it away. Yeah. All right, here is James's list. I don't have a list, but here is James' list. Go.
All right, so the best games of each year since I was born, from 1993, where the obvious answer is Doom, no questions asked. 1994, Freddy Fish and the Case of the Missing Kelp Seeds. 1995, Putt Putt Saves the Zoo. 1996, Back to Real Games, Super Mario 64. 97, Symphony of the Night. 98 was really hard. There's Ocarina of Time, Metal Gear Solid 1, and Pokemon Yellow. Gonna have to give it to Metal Gear here, probably. I find that game to be really enjoyable, but Ocarina is very close. 99, it's either the original Super Smash Bros. Or Crash Team Racing. 2000, Majora's Mask. 2001, Final Fantasy X. 2002, Resident Evil Remake, easy. 2003, Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne. The original Warcraft couldn't compete with Resident Evil for me, but Frozen Throne sneaks in here. Now, when I was originally doing this one, I was like, whatever year Mushihime-sama came out in, I'm going to pick it for that year. Now, unfortunately for that game, it came out in 2004, which is the same year as Metal Gear Solid 3, which kind of blows that one out of the water, so unfortunate for that game. 2005, what a fantastic year. We got both Psychonauts and Pathologic 1. Great year for storytelling, maybe not so much for gameplay. 2005, we have Black for the PS2. 2007, Bioshock. 2008, Mirror's Edge. 2009, Demon's Souls or Dragon Age Origins. 2010, Super Mario Galaxy 2. 2011, Dark Souls, of course. 2012, I have The Walking Dead Season 1, the Telltale game, and Etrian Odyssey 4. Both I enjoyed immensely. 2013 is a game I have about 8,000 hours in, Dota 2. 2014, Tales from the Borderlands, which in my opinion is the best game, Telltale ever released, and by far the best game in the Borderlands franchise, no question. 2015 was the hardest year for me, I reckon, more harder than 1998. 2015 was the year that both Undertale and Bloodborne came out, both which I thought were like incredible games that I loved to bits. 2016, we have Persona 5, Etrian 5, and The Witness, all which were fantastic, I thought. And then from here, 2017, Cuphead. Love the animation in that game and the gameplay. Celeste for 2018, of course. 2019 Disco Elysium, 2020 Doom Eternal, 2021 I didn't really play many games, but it defaults to Psychonauts 2, and then 2022 is of course Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So that is every game since I was born.
Yeah, it really shows that recently, in recent years, we haven't consumed many modern video games, right?
Yeah, I've been too busy playing the games for the show.
Exactly.
I also think that the years since the pandemic started, we saw a big lapse in releases because of that. So it's been a few slow years with, there's been stuff like Elden Ring and Master Duel, but nothing huge, right?
Yeah, and honestly, just listening to your list makes me wish that I'd answered this question because that seemed pretty fun. So I might do my own list and post it later. It is interesting. It gives a snapshot of the games that James and I value. So thank you very much, James, for putting in the effort to that question when I was clearly
Patrick,
too
for not doing it.
Alrighty, Mayday Meme's question spree continues with, which of the games that you've played for the podcast feel the least retro? I'm going to start off with this one. To me, the best answer for this question, without a doubt, is actually Freelancer. And I think it's the best answer to this question for two reasons. The first is that its presentation and graphics and controls all feel really modern. Like, this game looks fucking gorgeous even today. The second reason that I feel it feels like a modern game is that it has repetitive open world grinding content. So I feel like it hits both marks in terms of being a modern game, in that it looks and plays and controls like a modern game, but it also has this big gaping hole where its soul should be, where the I guess the meat of the gameplay should be. So I think Freelancer far and away is the game that feels the most modern.
I think Freelancer had plenty of soul. It was just everything else that was lacking. The game that comes to mind immediately for me is Riddick Butcher Bay, but that's because we played like the PS3 updated version of it.
That's true, yeah.
Which played very, very modern like. Maybe Chaos Theory, that game actually did feel a bit more, modern, even though I criticized it before. And then it's kind of hard. I feel like there's not a lot of stuff that feels super modern otherwise from the stuff that we've played, actually. It's hard.
And it tends to be the newer games. I guess I'd also just give a shout out to Super Metroid, which, although it doesn't actually feel modern, like, you definitely feel like you're playing an older game. I think that the game design, specifically the level design and the progression of power-ups, this game could come out tomorrow with the level design and the progression of its power-ups, and it would feel like another Metroidvania. Like, they kind of perfected the formula in a lot of ways in the very first title, which to me, it still blows my mind. I've said that multiple times. It was really shocking to me just how tightly that was all designed. So although it doesn't feel like a modern game, there are parts of that game which feel not just modern, but like refined modern.
Can I say Police Noughts? Because that game's gameplay is identical to modern visual novels.
It's not, though, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah,
actually.
It's not even close. Like, Police Noughts does the whole exhaust literally every dialogue option and examination multiple times in order to progress. I don't think modern visual novels follow that formula, right?
Maybe like we could count a platformer, like something like Drill Dozer almost, just because modern platformers happen to be mostly retro styled anyway. I find, like Celeste and stuff. But that game had like a lot of mechanics in it, and it was tight without. Maybe that makes it not a modern game, because modern games are filled with bloat.
No, I feel Drill Dozer's a far better call than something like Super Mario Brothers. Because sorry, is that the one we played? Was Super Mario
World?
Super Mario World, yeah. I feel like Super Mario World doesn't feel modern because it's not a tight design. It's kind of messy and fun. Whereas, Drill Dozer feels far more like what you'd expect from an indie platforming game that got released on Steam today.
I'm still not happy with any of these answers. I still feel like they all feel pretty dated to me.
Freelance is the best answer. Let's be honest. Okay, so final question from Mayday Mima. If Thief 2 Gold was ever released, do you think it would have improved on the game overall with better pacing? Just a little bit of context with this. Both when Thief 1 first released, Thief 1 the Dark Age, something like that, it has 4 less levels than Thief Gold, which is the version that most people would play today. There was a Thief 2 Gold planned with 4 additional levels and some extra bits and pieces that never eventuated. So, James, I don't know if you read this link at all, but do you think adding 4 new levels to Thief 2 would have improved on the game overall with better pacing, or do you think it would have been kind of the same game regardless?
I don't really feel super confident answering this one, honestly, because I'm not as invested in Thief as you are. So I was kind of going to defer to you on this one, to be honest.
Okay, that's good, because I do have an opinion on this, which is that I don't think it would have really changed our view of the game very much. The main problem with Thief 2, I think, is just basically the end portion of the game. Because do you remember there was those 2 levels at the end, Casing the Joint and Masks, where it was literally the same level twice in a row?
Yeah.
And that level was shit, and you had to do it twice. And then after that, you have Sabotage at Soulforge, which I think it's interesting. Sabotage at Soulforge is the massive map, James, if you remember, like the absolute
like
fuck
the
off
final
huge
one.
map. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that map has some interesting ideas, and like the concept of a final gauntlet that you have to go through as, you know, the professional, you know, you've played all the other levels, here's your final challenge, is a good one. But the map is just too big and too confusing. There's no way to track which antennas you've turned on and which ones you haven't. And you just get lost. You could just literally just miss one antenna in a room that you've been to before and not know you've missed it because the level is so big. I think the principles behind that level are fine, but it's like they didn't take the time to refine it into something good. So the problems with Thief 2 is not that there's not enough content, it's just that there are levels in the game which needed polishing and enhancing. And if they had done that, it would have been a much better game. Adding in extra levels doesn't fix those long, shitty parts of Thief 2. So, yes, I would have liked to see some new cool levels, but I don't think Thief 2 Gold would have made the game any magically better. And besides, Thief 1 Gold had added the Mission Thieves Guild, which made the game worse. So I don't even know if it would have necessarily
added that? Oh
Yep.
my god.
That's one of the missions that got added into the game. It wasn't in the original.
Yeah, maybe it would have made it worse. Jeez.
Anyway, thank you for the question about Thief. I liked it. And yeah, I have played a Thief 2 custom map since we played, and I enjoyed it a lot. Although it was very tough. It kind of makes sense. I can't remember the name of it, but it was difficult as hell. Okay, so thank you, Mayday Mima, for your excellent questions. All right, next question is from listener Haitu. Which games from the podcast have you changed your mind the most about since reviewing them?
Ooh, that was an interesting one. Feel like I have an idea of what Patrick's gonna say about this one, based on our conversations. Because the other week, I think one of us brought up Police Noughts, and I remember Patrick saying, "Man, that was a good game," and I was like, "Wait, you didn't recommend it when we recorded."
Yeah, definitely. That's a game that's like grown stronger in my mind. I think because I have the concept of the story and the atmosphere in my head. And now that I've finished it,
the hours of
I forgot about how painful the process of playing that video game is. But definitely, it's one that I remember more fondly. I don't think I've changed my mind about it if I critically think about it, though. I've got 2 answers for this, but the first one's like extremely obvious, and that's F-Zero GX.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought that would be the one you'd say, James.
Well, I feel like I've heard you say that before. I guess
know,
maybe I brushed it off. Yeah,
I
mean, it makes sense to me a lot. For me, it's probably Super Metroid after playing like Prime and realizing all of the things I valued. I still I rewatched gameplay of it and was like, I still don't feel like I want to play that game, but I do appreciate aspects of its design more. and more every year. So I
It's
think,
kind of the opposite of Metroid Prime in that its moment to moment gameplay is horrendous, but the process of being a player moving through its world is exactly what makes it so special. Like
yes,
existing because you see people and they're just moving from corridor to corridor, right? But when
yep,
you're playing the game, that's not what you're doing. You're like navigating through the world. And that's a really hard thing to, I guess, explain to someone if you're just showing them footage of the game.
yes. And then I looked through the list of every game we've played, and this one, I hadn't thought about it since playing it. And then when I saw the name, I was like, man, I'd love to play that again. And was like, wait, I was like lukewarm on it like back then. So that one was Tribe's Vengeance. I was like, man, skiing is fun. I'd like to do that again.
Actually, it's a good answer, but I kind of agree that if I were to actually play through it again, I wouldn't enjoy it as much. But I agree, skiing is amazing. Like that's a game mechanic that we just haven't seen replicated since, and it's awesome. It's one of the most fun movement abilities in any game I've ever played ever, and I don't think that can be understated.
And then last one that I had here was Prince of Persia Warrior Within, the second game we ever did.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear you say that.
After playing the first Prince of Persia, I understand how much better this game's combat was than the original. And I think having not found more platforming games with similar, like 3D platformers with a similar platforming system, I appreciate the movement in that game more and more every year, I think.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed unfortunately killed Prince of Persia in a lot of ways. It's very sad.
Yeah, much
Um,
worse.
my final answer to it, much to my chagrin, James, is Vagrant Story. And I think the reason for this, obviously, I really like the story of this game, but I think that when I was talking about its gameplay, I said like I don't think this game's gameplay has tremendous depth. It's complexity over depth. I think the
Yep.
gameplay in Vagrant Story is actually pretty good and interesting, and I think that after playing other JRPGs, it just made me appreciate the systems that they had at play here so much more because they were trying so hard to do something multifaceted and interesting that when I was exposed to games which seemed to be more focused on grinding than anything else, it's made me really appreciate the systems that had at play, even if they didn't quite work. And I think that if they were to remake this game with a overhauled menu system, um, I would probably give it a try, which is a long way from I think where I started with this game. I think if you can improve the UI, and that is no easy task given the complexity of the video game, I
Yep.
think that you'd have a tremendous game on your hands.
I think something that it did really well that I didn't realize at the time maybe was that it kind of had this like sped up grinding process where instead of like painfully focusing on grinding characters, you focused on like grinding your weapons and weapon skill strategically, like
Hmm.
based on what you were fighting without like actually padding the game out with like hundreds of enemy encounters. So I kind of liked that aspect of it. I think the weapon system ultimately, like once you know what you're doing, it's very straightforward. It's like there's like one stat you max or something. It's very one dimensional. But those kind of games, when you don't know what you're doing, there's like an enjoyable process of figuring them out, which I have always really enjoyed. So
Yeah, I'm kind of like that is kind of in Fallout 3 and in this game is kind of like a joke. Like I don't actually think it's a good system because it's usually extremely easy to figure out what to target. There's not really what the system kind of promises, I think, is opportunity cost. It's like, oh, I have all these different options with different hit percentages that have different effects. That's not how it works in practice. It's very easy to immediately figure out the correct limb or whatever to attack, and that's something that I would just get rid of from this game because I don't actually think it adds that much.
I have encountered a system like a limb targeting system that actually is interesting.
Oh,
I
what's it
think
from?
so in Etrian 4,
Hmm.
well, in all the games basically, you can use these spells that bind, like you can disable heads, arms, or legs, and every single enemy, every single attack in the game corresponds to a limb, and like the monster will like use a bite attack, and it doesn't tell you, but you can infer that that means if you disable their head, they can't use that attack. And then later on in the game, it gets like harder to figure out which is which, and also those moves tend to be very low damage in a game that's all about like killing things quickly. So I think that system's really cool, especially because it really plays into the like role playing side of things with like the description of the attack like being a clue as to which like what you're like you need to figure it out. Because I think in like Fallout, it's like he's holding a gun, okay, I'll shoot his hand or like his eyes, and then because everyone's a human with a gun, the answer doesn't change. But when you have like different weird monsters, the answer changes constantly and is non-obvious.
More importantly, James, I think that in Fallout, the answer is to always kill the enemy, not disable the enemy. In a more RPG orientated game, using that utility and crowd
in a more
control.
RPG orientated game.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, yes, actually. Have you played that game?
Yeah.
At least as far as the gameplay is concerned, when you're dealing with a high health monster where utility and crowd control are important, I can see a limb targeting system being a lot more effective. In a game where the priority or the most effective thing to do is to kill the enemy, and that's far more effective than disabling its a limb, then why would you ever try to disable a limb?
It's about the length of the battle and if it's not just humans every single fight, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, I think Vagrant Story is certainly one that I look back on a lot more fondly, even if I wasn't in love with it. I will maintain that the box puzzles in that game are a waste of space, even as much as James loves them. I don't know. They had to put every gameplay mechanic possible in that game.
That's
and
why we have to play Catherine, because the entire game is box puzzles.
I don't mind that. I'm into that. You know how much I love Steven's Sausage Roll.
Well, then why can't you get into the Vagrant Story ones?
I don't know. I think I just wanted the game to be over, James, and I kept getting blocked by box puzzles. It was grim. But yeah, thanks for the question, Haitu. And I think that, yeah, it is something that we constantly have to be aware of. When we review a game, that's not our definitive opinion for life. Things do change as we reflect upon them.
Very quickly sometimes, too.
Yeah. So, second question that Haitu asked was, if you were not limited by time, what game would you be itching to cover for the podcast?
Ooh, I've got a lot of answers to this one too, but you go first.
Okay, so I kind of answered this with a broad genre, and there's a lot of games that fall under that umbrella. So if I had to name like one genre where games I wish we could do a whole lot more, it would be strategy games.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So RTS games, Homeworld, Dark Reign, CNC Generals, turn-based strategy games, and turn-based tactics games in a way, like Jagged Alliance 2, Silent Storm, games like Alpha Centauri. What's that big TBS game that's set in space, James, that you've played?
Master of Orion 2.
Master of Orion 2. These are all games that I would love to play for the show, but realistically, you cannot just play these massive strategy and games for 15 hours and call it a day. When we have played these games, we've also always had to dedicate almost a double slot to it, like with Heroes of Might and Magic 3. And even then, it felt like we were still kind of scratching the surface of what the nature of these games were. So it's no specific game, because there are so many games I would love to play for the podcast, but definitely strategy games in general are what I would love to dive more into, because I love this genre. I love all of these games. When I think of them, I get warm, fuzzy feelings. It's just that realistically, we don't have the time to spend 50 hours playing a strategy game over 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I tried to avoid the obvious answer of just picking like 10 JRPGs, but so I do have FF7 there, and I do have Kingdom Hearts 2. But then I also picked Wizardry 1, which I think would be like really fun. Yeah, it would be really fun and miserable for us to do. Baldur's Gate 2, so I can finally pay off that bet I had with a certain someone. And Morrowind, actually, I think would be a really fun game to cover for the show. That game, I think, has not aged well in a lot of ways, but there are like a lot of there's a lot of cool stuff to find in that game, and I do actually like the world building of that game a lot more than I like the other Elder Scrolls games. So I would be really into talking about that one.
Yeah, I haven't played much Morrowind, but one of my favorite things about it is apparently when you get a quest from an NPC, they give you directions. Not a quest marker, they give you directions, and you
Yep.
have to look at the geography of the world and follow the directions to find a cave. And that is awesome. I
Yeah.
love that. I like that's just a very cool thing that you'd have to do. I think it would do so much to immerse you in the world, almost effortlessly, just by well, I say effortlessly, but obviously game
It can
studios
be
aren't
really
really interested
annoying
in
when
this
you can't
anymore.
find it.
That's true, and maybe that's why they got rid of this system. But the concept is very cool, and I'm a big fan of it. And I know that Morrowind does a lot of things like that.
Old World of Warcraft quests did that. Like, there never used to be markers on the map to tell you where to go. It was always the NPC's directions in this gigantic game world. Mm.
Yeah, and I mean, man, that's a topic all of itself
Oh, WoW
because
Classic. That's a great answer for this. I'd love to do that. We could argue for like 4 hours about
I'm
that game.
WoW Classic may be worse than a JRPG. I don't know. It's kind of like a JRPG in its ultimate form, isn't it?
Can we play RuneScape? Was that
Man, you're going to be very interested in the answer I have to one of these other questions. I'll tell you that much, James.
RPGs and strategy games? I think that's the name of the game. I would actually really like to do Persona 3, actually.
Oh my god.
I'd
I
love
can't.
to.
It's just like the
It's
concept,
like
the
80
idea,
hours. It's
the
like,
idea of having to play these games like drives me nuts. In some way, like really, us having this time limit on our show is a massive buff to me and a nerf to James, and I'm forever grateful for that.
one day, one day the
maybe.
floodgate will lift and Patrick will quit.
Okay. So thanks. That's a good question, and I think it definitely shows where we're orientated. Okay, final question from Haitu is: the podcast focuses on games from 2005 or before. Is there a genre where you think games of this age tend to have aged particularly badly, such that it's hard to find a title a modern gamer would enjoy? And a genre whose games you think have aged particularly well, and why? Because the genre was already fully developed to that point, or another reason? James, you tell me, you start off with games that have aged gracefully, or a genre of games that's aged gracefully, and I'll start off with a genre that has not.
Gracefully, that's difficult. I actually couldn't think of one for this half of the question. I have plenty of
Oh.
answers for the poorly one, but I feel like almost
I've got an
every-
answer, James.
Okay, it's like to me the only answer is platformers.
No, it's not platforms. The answer is racing games. And the reason I'm in a great position to answer this question is that all of the racing games we've done have been not just good, but very good. Burnout 3, F-Zero, Pod Racer, Diddy Kong Racing. I enjoyed all of these games a lot. Obviously, F-Zero more in hindsight than when I played it. And what's more, James, for the purpose of this question, am a modern gamer with racing games. I didn't play these games really growing up except for Need for Speed Underground 2. So what I found playing these games is that they were all enormously enjoyable and, intuitive to control and learn. So if I can enjoy them as a relative newcomer, I think most people who are new to it would be able to get something out of them and would not find them nearly as alienating as pretty much any other game that we've played so far today.
That's a good answer. I actually think that of all the games that have suffered, I feel like racing games are one of them. I feel like it's like you have like Mario Kart and your like Forza Sim type games, I think. I think lots of the like really experimental ones, like stuff like Burnout and Need for Speed and F-Zero have all kind of like died off because you kind of have the audience who is into car sims because they love cars and like the kart racer audience, and I don't think there's much overlap in the middle.
Well, I know that games like Colin McRae Rally 2 still have a big following, and that's quite an old car sim game. Although, honestly, this is kind of very a blank space. So someone who's more into car sims can probably answer this better than I can. But yeah, I just feel like you could get someone who hasn't played racing games before, give them a racing game that's 20 years old, and they would still have a good time. Like it's a very kind of intuitive set of controls, particularly if they've done any driving in their life before. Well, in that case, I'll let you start out with FPS. Sorry, with games that haven't aged.
Okay, so I have three answers. So two of these are puzzle games and
Hmm.
and mobile games.
Hmm.
And mobile games I feel is a bit cheating because for a long time you only had stuff like on your dad's old Nokia that barely ran. Yeah,
Snake,
basically.
and there was
Um,
that spaceship shooting one that I can't remember the name of.
Puzzle games I feel like barely existed as a genre for a long time.
Oh, they did. They were called point and click adventure games.
Yeah, or like literal bejeweled clone, like stuff like that. I feel like, your portals and your witnesses and stuff like that
And
really
Steven sausage rolls.
took a long time to develop. But my real answer for this is 3D action games, not named Devil May Cry 3. I think basically every like 3D brawling type game has aged quite poorly. I think that everything that comes out now just completely destroys those old games.
I mean, this is a genre that I'm not like. Obviously, I played the older Devil May Cry's, Devil May Cry 3, but
Prince of Persia, God of
uh,
War.
it's interesting. I guess this kind of genre has kind of died out in favor of Uncharted. Like they've really fused the cinematic quality into 3D action games, so they've kind of almost diminished that whole aspect of
I
them.
actually think that Dark Souls killed this genre to a degree. Like even God of War like quit being this mashy brawling game and became a more methodical over the shoulder kind of game, right? Like you don't see those kinds of mashy games other than like the only game that I can think off the top of my head that plays sort of like that is like Genshin Impact.
Kingdom Hearts.
Has had like one game in like how long?
I guess I that's the game I've been playing through Kingdom Hearts 1 as I told you, and that game, I mean, it's because I'm an idiot and I'm playing on proud mode and I'm not grinding at all. I do have to be a bit more deliberate, but
Yes.
even then I can't resist doing a bit of mashing, and it sometimes works out. So is it a bad thing that this died? I don't know. That sounds kind of like a shitty gameplay design.
Well, I think
Thank you, Dark
I think
Souls.
either way, I think it's a perfect answer for this question.
So my answer to this question is actually FPS games post Half-Life 1. So yeah, I think there are an absolute slew of shitty FPS games that came out around that time between like 1999 and 2005. Um and it's all Half-Life's fault because Half-Life 1 showed that you could tell a kind of cinematic story in an FPS game instead of it being about murdering people with guns. And as a result, you got a bunch of games that were copying Half-Life or trying to without fully understanding why they were copying Half-Life or without any of the skill or brilliance that, caused that game to come into existence. So if you play, there's so many generic shitty FPS games from 1998 to 2005 that this was the kind of thing that stood out. Like there's a guy called Civi who reviews a lot of these FPS games, the good and the bad. And I got to say, there were so many bad ones and far more bad than good. Specifically, that chunk of time when the design principles of FPS games fundamentally shifted into something else. And I feel like they didn't really crack it until Call of Duty 4 came out and showed this is what a cinematic FPS is meant to look like. All of the in between stuff were kind of just not very enjoyable.
I feel like the vast majority of good shooters in the last few decades have been primarily multiplayer games, honestly. I feel like a campaign is almost there to get you on to playing the multiplayer.
That is pretty
um,
accurate. I mean, you could look at something like certainly Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, a game I'm playing through now, is a lot more interesting as a single player FPS game than most games I've played. I really enjoyed Crisis as a video game. I know that that game has a reputation for being a graphics game, like it was all about the aesthetics, but it actually is quite a fun FPS game with all the different abilities you have and all the different murdering you get to do. But yeah, it's a bit of a desolate genre nowadays in a lot of
what's
ways.
that game with the purposely awful art style that came out
Oh,
recently?
Cruelty Squad?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cruelty Squad is a very interesting game. I hesitate to call it a great game. I feel like it's overrated in some ways. Like I don't think it's quite as fun as people say, but it's what it does, what I guess the artistic statement that it's trying to make with its design is amazing. Like the story of Cruelty Squad and how the aesthetic ties into that is fascinating. And I don't want to say more than that, but there's a whole rabbit hole to go down with that game. It's far more than meets the eye. And certainly when I first bought that game, James, I uninstalled it, and it's only after coming back to it, 6 months later that I've grown a deeper appreciation for what it's trying to do.
I often find that those games that you push through a second time and actually manage to enjoy end up being like really enjoyable generally.
Yeah. Funnily enough, less so for its gameplay than for its aesthetic and story, believe it or not.
Yes.
Which is a weird thing to say about that game.
All right, so we're at about 50 minutes and we've got heaps of questions left. What are we doing for music breaks this episode, Patrick?
I hope you have something planned.
No, I didn't. I thought we could just pick a random song from a game that we hadn't played on the show yet, and then we'll go with that. The one I'll go with for this one is last time we did Metroid, and we noted that I really liked the music from the Overworld, just as I did in Super Metroid, and I was trying to figure out exactly why that was the case, and I realized that as a kid I had a copy of Jazz Jackrabbit installed on DOS on my computer, and one of the and that game came out like 6 months after Super Metroid, and one of the tracks very closely mimics that. I think, I don't know if it was intentional, but I'm very nostalgic for it, so I'm going to share the Medievo soundtrack from Jazz Jackrabbit 1, which was originally made by Epic. So here it is. So that was the Medievo theme from Jazz Jackrabbit. Patrick, we've got a heap of questions to get through still. What's next?
Okay, so next up, firstly, thank you, Haitu, for your excellent questions. Next one is from Gerog Bro. Through the games you played this year for the pod, were there any lessons learned that can be applied to your day-to-day non-gaming lives?
That's an interesting one. I had a few answers to this. So I'd say the number one would just be general analytical skills. Like, I feel like, and I don't know if this came from the games or more so just us arguing and working out, like, fallacious thought patterns that we had previously and moving through that. I think I benefited a lot from that. I guess I say the number one biggest thing was being able to more easily see criticism objectively and not feel personally attacked. I don't think I was quite prepared for that going into the show, but now it just doesn't mean like I don't feel anything anymore, which is great.
Yeah, certainly things were a lot more
Spicy.
emotionally volatile at the beginning, which honestly we both knew we were getting into. So it's not like we went in and, the other person's feelings were seriously hurt or anything. It's just that, we were a bit more emotionally invested in our discussion. Whereas I agree with you,
that
James.
first
I think
argument
that...
we had about Banjo Kazooie was so good.
Oh my God. I think that nowadays we I mean, in some ways it's a problem because we end up being too respectful of the other person's opinions. In some ways,
I agree. All your opinions suck.
We end up closer to the middle, but I like that. I like that about our discussions now. It feels more mature.
It is. It's easier to recognize when you disagree and just to like let it go. That's a big one.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that I've gotten better at understanding different perspectives and I guess accepting that you can have different conflicting perspectives on a topic and that being okay.
Yes.
I think before, or at least I've certainly seen a lot of other people, they act like it is impossible to have two contrary opinions exist on the same topic, which is fucking nuts. Like, you can have so many different takes and interpretations and perspectives on anything, and the world is better for having that diverse sense of perspectives, because it means that when other people come to discussions and analysis about a piece of media or art, you can find a perspective that somewhat aligns with how you feel in some way, shape, or form.
What? No, you can't.
It's I think it's when people say definitively this is the only opinion that can be have on it, aka when there are sacred cows that can't be criticized. That's when you should be very wary of what they're saying, and you should be almost be prepared to call them out on their bullshit, because who the hell do they think they are, basically? It's okay to have an opinion and hold it strongly, and in fact I encourage people to do so, but to refuse to be open to other perspectives is a very, very bad thing.
Yes. Also, something that should probably have been obvious to me that I noticed far too late was that if somebody has developed an attachment to something based on a flawed premise, for example, if I said, I love the sky because it's the color green, right? And then somebody says, actually, it's not green, and they're like, oh, that's true. It doesn't mean that all like 10 years or whatever of liking that thing disappears suddenly. Like, you can tell them that their premise is wrong, but they still have all that time of being invested into that thing, right? Like, their opinion doesn't change instantly. It happens over time, if it happens at all.
And you can also like something and acknowledge at the same time it's not very good. Like, that's fine. Like, I guess the number one thing I've learned is that a lot of those contradictions are actually okay and are important in discussions.
Yes.
You need to have different perspectives. The answer I had for this, James, is actually time management. Although I'm still a little shaky in this. Certainly, you've mastered this far better than I have, and pretty much every one of the delays we've had to do over the past year or two is my fault. It's never been on James.
I agree.
Except, hey, listen, you got sick a couple of times, therefore we're
it's
equally
all right.
to blame.
I got the cool Tony Hawk's episode.
Yeah, you did, yeah. So certainly, while my time management isn't anywhere near as good as James, it is better than it used to be, and I'm going to take that as a win.
Yeah, I agree with that. Mine has improved massively thanks to this. Although I probably wouldn't give that, like, I think the question was trying to be a bit more about what have you learnt from games rather than your experience on the show. And I didn't really have a super good answer to that one. But definitely, like, doing all this has had a lot of positive impact on my life.
I agree. I love doing it, James. Thanks for doing it with me, mate.
Nice.
Okay, so next question. So this one is from Gerag Bro and Rosu, dude. I'll just read through both of them. So Gerag Bro goes, "What do you think about the trend of remastered games? Is this the correct way to make older games accessible to audiences with modern expectations? Or are they shameless cash grabs cashing in on the nostalgia of older players? Have you ever seen a remaster of a game you haven't played and given it a chance because of that remaster that you wouldn't have otherwise?" And then Rosso Dude further says, "Do remakes revitalize old games for modern audiences, or do they stifle innovation and lead to subtle qualities of the original being forgotten?"
Okay, so these are pretty similar. They're both about, the nature of remasters and remakes. And I find this topic kind of interesting because I'm wondering if in the next decade or two they stop being necessary. Now, I thought this was the case years ago, but then we got The Last of Us 1 remastered, and I was like, why? But I feel like getting up on this generation moving forward, it's probably not going to be as necessary. You know what I mean? Even when we did Resident Evil 4, I was like, this game plays pretty like a new game. Oh, that's a great answer for the other question. Resident Evil 4. That game has quality of life features out the arse.
So, firstly, specifically on the topic of The Last of Us remaster, there is a very good reason for it, which is that it's never been on PC before. So, if you're going to release it for PC and reconfigure it and everything, you may as well do a graphical update at the same time, right?
Yeah, and that was my answer to the second part, which was like, have you ever played a game that you wouldn't have otherwise? And basically, all instances of this can be related to a console game coming to PC, basically. It's not about all the other upgrades, it's about how easy it is to access to me.
Yeah, and one of the ways these companies can cover the cost of porting a game over, although I would say that cost is a lot less than it used to be with the convergence of architecture,
Yep.
is to re-release a remaster at the same time. So uh, I would say in general, I am far less mad about remasters and remakes. And in fact, I would say on balance, I'm more positive about them than negative on them. I think it's firstly important to distinguish remasters from remakes. I would say something like the Resi 2 or Resi 4 games are remakes, and I would consider them just new video games in the
Yeah.
same way that you would consider a remake of Casino Royale or the Coen Brothers True Grit.
Something like the Final Fantasy VII remake. That's
Yeah,
just a different game, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's just a different video game, and I would never. I just don't have a single bone in my body to be mad about people who remake things, because we have been remaking and retelling the same stories throughout the history of humanity. I mean, the Lost Odyssey and Iliad formed the basis, and the Bible formed the basis of human literature, and we have retold those stories endless times. Let people remake these things and give them their own perspective and vision on them as much as they choose, right? Like, I just don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's ever a bad thing.
Yeah.
Remasters, it's a bit trickier, but on balance, I think that what I would say is that I don't really give a shit. Like, you have good remasters like the Command and Conquer remaster, which basically kept the game exactly the same, but they remastered the audio and they gave you widescreen, and they had some quality of life things like
Yep.
you could unit queue, whereas before you had to make units one by one, but effectively the game was the same. People love that. I mean, like, great. It's a way for people to and they charged $20 for it as well, which was a big part of why it was so well received. I think that the main category of remasters to be made at are lazy cash grabs, like GTA being remastered 8 times or Skyrim being remastered eight times. But you can just not fucking buy those games. Like, it doesn't actually hurt me in any meaningful way. So I know people get mad about remakes and remasters, but I just can't summon the energy. If it's a remaster, I'm in favor. Sorry, if it's a remake, I'm in favor overall, and if it's a remaster, there are chances that it's going to have an overall positive impact. So yeah, I'm in
I
favor.
also just think it's a very like case by case basis kind of thing. Like, if Nintendo said they're remastering F-Zero GX, I would be like, sweet, you literally can't get that game on any system without buying a used copy of the original or pirating it. So it's like, that would be awesome. And then there's stuff like the Final Fantasy X remaster, which they outsourced and they did a really bad job of everything. So
Mhm.
uh, I don't know. I think it's something that's inevitable, basically. And it's just you have to wait and see if it's good.
My basic feelings on this is I feel like the problem isn't the remasters or remakes themselves. It's that a lot of the discourse that emerges in the wake of a remaster or remake is stuff I disagree with. And Rosso kind of touches on this when he says, "Do they stifle innovation and lead to subtle qualities of the original being forgotten?"
Well, I
And
kind
I
of
think,
agree with that second part. I actually do agree that for the most part, there will be subtle qualities lost. Like, unless you're like, even if you're like the same exact people who worked on the original and it's been like a decade, you will not remember, everything that was going through your head when you were making it originally, right? You just can't. There's just too
Mhm.
much in every facet of the development. And if you're reconstructing something, it's kind of, and you're not adding anything new, it's kind of inevitable that stuff is going to be lost in translation. So,
and I can cite an example where you've been mad at the existence of a remaster because you think it leads to a worse game, which is Majora's Mask. I know you've
yep,
brought that up, and I know that you've also brought up the Demon Souls remake as particularly after I listened to the Demon Souls remake music, I was like, what have they done?
done to
What
this
have they
game.
done?
Yeah, it's
What have
so
they like?
bad.
How did they make the music actively bad from such a gorgeous soundtrack? It's mind bending. So it's understandable that people are like cautious about remasters and remakes, but to me, a remaster and remake can be shit or good in the same way that a new game can be shit or good. I
Yeah.
think what you said about a case by case basis is critical. To have a generalized opinion opposing remakes and remasters doesn't make sense to me. Critiquing specific remakes and remasters as being cash grabs or an inferior product or whatever it is that does make sense to me. Like shape your critique specifically to those things. Don't just say remakes remasters bad because
The
it's far too simplified an opinion.
I do want to touch on the stifles creativity thing as well, because to me, like, if a company is doing a remaster, there's a few reasons that could be. It could be there's demand for it, and in which case, like, why is there a problem? Like, of course they'll do it because people want this game to be remastered. Two, the company is strapped for cash, right? And I don't think and they need a quick
Rockstar.
buck. Yeah, exactly.
See, they're not strapped for cash. They're milking it. Yeah. But I feel like there's a lot of heated discussion around this concept, but it's not specifically about remakes and remasters. It's everything that emerges from it, which is people saying this remake is strictly superior to the original game. And that's just a nonsensical thing to say. Like you just appreciate each one on its own merits. Compare them as different games and
I think
you're fine.
the version of Dark Souls on Steam currently, the remastered version, is strictly better than the original janky mess with
Yes, that's with
the
games for Windows Live.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my
strict
god.
improvements.
That was the worst. Thankfully, and DS Fix came out DS Fix came out like 2 days after the game, which just increased the frame rate from 30 to 60 with
Yeah,
like incredible. Yeah. Like that so Dark Souls' defense, like the whole story of that is fascinating. People made a petition to get Dark Souls on PC because Dark Souls was like dominating the entire gaming media cycle, and all the PC players like me were salty. And they did, but From Software had literally, hadn't made PC games for 10 years because ever since they stopped their King's Field games, they'd stopped. So they did the shittiest port known to mankind, but overall we were still grateful because we got Dark Souls on PC. And after that, after Dark Souls 2, they did good PC ports. Also, one final thing with this question. Gerrig Bro asks, have you seen a remaster of a game you haven't played and given a chance? I think the best answer for this one is actually System Shock 1. So the System Shock 1 remake adds a lot of things, but probably the most important of which is mouse look. Because when the game originally released, it didn't have mouse look. It was meant to be played with a keyboard. And I think that
man, I was
I
about
would
to
have
say
been
that's not out yet.
System Shock. Oh, well, the remake, right?
Like the
Yeah, yeah.
Night Dive one.
Oh
Yeah.
god, yeah. That does not look very good for what it's worth. But anyway, I think that the remake of the original System Shock one that's available on GOG with mouse look and some better UI options was a lot more accessible to me as a player who's never really played one of those dungeon crawlers strictly on a keyboard before. And I'm kind of honestly intimidated by the idea of doing it without mouse look. One of the games I'm fascinated in playing one day is Ultima Underworld, because it's been described as like one of the, like as the birth of the immersive sim. And I have a deep love for that genre. But there's no mouse look in that game. You have to control from a 3D real time perspective with keyboard, and that's a big ask for me. Like that's a very intimidating thing. So System Shock 1 Remake, which introduced quality of life features for a more modern gamer, got me invested in that game and interested in that game in a way that I maybe wouldn't have been otherwise. So if you want an example of a game that is highly regarded but is, I guess, a bit hostile that tipped me over the edge, System Shock 1.
What about Resident Evil?
Well, I don't know. I think I could have played the original Resident Evil.
I think we would have played the first one.
Yeah.
But I think we won't play the first one now because of it.
So I think
it's almost the opposite of what the question is asking. But
it's a bit too similar, because the problem is that we don't need to, but we choose to diversify the games we play for the podcast instead of doing multiple games that are very similar.
Like stealth games.
Yeah, they're all radically different. But like we didn't do Resi 2 not because we jumped to Resi 4, not because we don't think Resi 2 is worth playing, but because it's very similar to the Resi 1 remake. And that's why we also didn't do Resi 1, because it's very similar to Resi 1 remake.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But great question. I love discussion around these topics, and I think ultimately the number one reason to want remakes and remasters is that it creates discussion about games that have been forgotten, and that is a good thing. Like, even if you think the remaster is shit, all of a sudden everyone's talking about this old game that no one would have been talking about otherwise, and what's good about it. And that's a net positive as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Next one.
Okay, next is Scion Storm, who used to he's guested on an episode with us on our Streets of Rage episode, and we've been on his show. He's now moved on to Clearer Waters with his Star Trek podcast, which honestly feels like a more natural home for him in a lot of ways. I think he's a big Star Trek buff, and I get along with him because of that. He appreciates Deep Space Nine, which is something I always look for in a friend. First question he asked, and this is a big one. If you could develop your own game, what kind of game would it be? What have you learned from the games that you've played for the show that you would apply or avoid?
It's interesting. So I think if I was to make my own game, I would have to pick something doable, basically. Which basically means either like a platformer, a puzzle game, or like a dungeon crawler with very simple art. So to me, and my day job is software development, actually. So I really understand the need to minimize scope in order to make projects doable. And as for like stuff I've learned from playing games, I feel like a trap that I would fall into is that I would be like, all right, this game has this element that I love, and this one has this one, and this game has this awesome thing. And I feel like I would try to cram everything together, and it would turn into a tasteless soup of mechanics, basically. But I think there's a lot of stuff that old games do that new games could do more. Like, I think the number one important thing is to have surprises in your game that fit in with the gameplay. Like stuff like, like how Metroid has and the hidden moves and stuff like that, or like things to engage you later on into the game, because I feel like the hardest part is always once the game settles into a rhythm and it's like 15 hours long and you've been doing the same thing for a while. You need to like introduce ideas to keep things fresh every now and then.
I completely agree with that. Like, Prey is one of my favorite games of all time, but that game in its final third introduces nothing new. And I think
Yep.
it's massively to the detriment of that game's pacing. And I have only finished it once, but I've got to the 2/3 point like 3 times, and
Yeah.
I just stop playing because I lose interest because there's no more surprises. So I think that's a fantastic point, James.
The only other thing is player agency to me is really important. I don't like it when games make decisions for me, or like they waste my time, or they do a half-assed job of taking control away from you. Something I hate. Like I like cutscenes in games, but I
Mhm.
hate when games try to pussyfoot around doing cutscenes because they don't want to take control away for the player, and they do these half-assed, like
Half-Life 2, baby.
yeah, shitty gameplay that just wastes your time when instead they could have something that looks cool.
So my answer to this question is a bit cheaty because the truth is, while James has a background in software development, I do not. So I don't think I'm capable of developing a video game. But what I do think I'm capable of, and maybe it's kind of arrogant for me to say so, but where my talents more lie is certainly writing. And I've thought a little bit about the writing in a video game, and I think that the number one influence, if I was to ever write a video game, would absolutely be Pathologic. And Pathologic does a lot of things interesting in a narrative space. And I mean, Pathologic often gets talked about its gameplay, but what it does in a narrative space as well. And this isn't even the fourth wall breaking stuff. This is just the brick and mortar way it tells its story is absolutely fascinating. To give a couple of examples of things it does is number one, it's the density of its world building. The town in Pathologic has a very dense and layered history with these different factions and these different characters between these factions, which also have their own independent hierarchies. And then a bunch of those independent characters have specific relationships with other people and other factions. It's a very complex web of relationships and history that exists before you even set foot in the town. And that kind of density of writing is something that you really only see in a game like, I don't know, Disco Elysium or immersive Sims to some degree, but Pathologic does it, better than most. So if ever I was to write a game, I would strive for density over scale, I guess is how I put it. Because, the scale of Pathologic is small, but the amount of stuff shoved into that town is ridiculous. Even more interestingly, I think, is that we've talked a lot about how we love it when games are more hostile to the player. And in fact, games that we've
Yes.
even disliked, like Ecstatica and Another World, we're still fascinated by the aspect of them, which is hostility to the player. I think Pathologic is one of the only video games I've played where the narrative and the way they craft the story is hostile to the player,
Yes.
because it still frames it. The really cool thing it does is it doesn't feel like it's taking away from your agency. When you play Pathologic, you are extremely important. You are the healer. Maybe there's a couple of others, but you're the one in your playthrough who's mostly getting most of the things done, and you're the only one who can realistically try to save the town. You're a figure of tremendous importance. But instead of making you the hero like you would see in a typical RPG where everyone is supporting you and then you go on to confront the big bad with the support of everything and the narrative is wrapping around you as a player, instead in Pathologic, everyone or nearly everyone is out to manipulate and abuse you and take advantage of you and lie to you. So you're still critical to the development of this story in all of the actions you're trying to take to resolve this pandemic, but everyone is fucking with you. And
Yes.
you see this, I think, particularly in the Bachelor playthrough, where every single attempt to do good is almost immediately thwarted because of other factions screwing around with you. But it's true with the Haruspecs as well. You're the most important character, but everyone in the world of Pathologic has their own motivations and desires and goals, and they are actively working towards those, even as they're having civil conversations with you, asking you nicely to do this thing. So I think that Pathologic's ability to write a story that is hostile to the player, that still has you as a central figure influencing things, is is remarkable. Like, I really haven't seen this before. And if I were to write a game story, if I could capture a fraction of what Pathologic does with its story, I would be a happy man. So
Yes.
yeah, I know I've monologued for a while here, but yeah, if I were to try to create something in a gaming space, I would try to give the player an experience that Pathologic gives you instead of trying to shove a story down the player's throat.
Also, I'm no artist, but I hate modern game UIs, and old game UIs are pure soul. So be some chunky mess from me.
You would make some absolute disaster of a UI.
Yeah, like Diablo 2's like covers half the screen with like demonic pictures, like that kind of thing.
Do you like Cruelty Squad's UI?
Oh, I think it's hilarious.
It's so funny.
I think I would probably play that at some point. Like, I do like it.
It's so, that UI is just the most hilarious. It's so good.
It's so funny.
It's so hard to even understand. You know how you reload in that game? Oh my god, it's so funny. Yeah, you hold down the right click and you pull down on the mouse, and you have to bring it below a line to reload the gun. And if you don't bring it down below the line, the gun doesn't reload.
It's so good.
It's so funny. It's like the developers are like, how can we make the most fucking stupid reload system? I know, let's do this. It's like a joke. Yeah, thank you for that question, Silent Storm, because or Drew. Yeah, obviously I can't make a game, but Pathologic's storytelling blew me away, and I think that I wish it would get more recognition, even more so for the story it tells than the fourth wall breaking stuff, because I still feel that distracts from the brilliance of just the story it's telling.
Yeah, I guess for me, the real answer is a game where I can minimize the amount of art that it requires, because I feel like I can do all the programming and I could maybe learn music, but I feel like art's the real killer. Art and animation is what gets stick in the mud, so something very simple looking. AI generated, baby.
Yeah, there we go. Problem solved. All right, next question from Drew. If you could have dinner with any single real person in the video game industry, who would it be and why? What would you ask them about? And this can be literally anyone: composers, developers, programmers, etc., etc.
Ooh, that's a good one. I have two answers to this. The first one, and I wonder if we've had this question before and I've answered it previously this way, but it's really the only good answer. Well, it's like, to me, it's the best answer to this question, and that is Ice Frog. I think that is like, I would love to do that. One, to learn his true identity, and two, just to talk about the guy whose game I spent like 8,000 hours on. So
that's a good question. All right, a good answer. Because yeah, I'd also like to meet him. Although I feel like he just wouldn't say anything the entire dinner. I'd be asking questions and he'd just be completely
like,
quiet.
I can't tell you.
For me, this is a bit esoteric, but there's a guy. My answer is Jay Tholen, who is the designer / artist / composer of a video game called Hypnospace Outlaw, which I think secretly is one of the most interesting games ever made. It's Hypnospace Outlaw is a game I think I've talked about a little bit on the show before, but it's basically a game where you play as a moderator for a fictional mashup of GeoCities and MySpace, where you're assigned tasks by the creators of this website to track down things and moderate them, remove them. Like, it might be there's illegal music sharing going down and you have to figure it out and censor it, or people are posting copyrighted images and you have to find them and censor them. And there's more to the game ultimately, but what it is that it's a brilliant detective game where you have to logically identify links between people and web pages and do basically Google searching to identify key terms to figure out where all of these hidden infractions are, all the while uncovering the stories of the lives of these people who live in the 90s internet, which for anyone who was alive back when the 90s internet was a thing, this game just nails it. It's just perfectly 90s internet. Everything about it feels real.
Do you have lots of cool toolbars that Nan downloaded?
Probably one of the first things you do is download a skin for your music player.
Nice.
Most people's websites have horrendously animated GIFs. It'll be like, here's a skeleton playing a trumpet on this side. playing a tune, and there here's it flipped on the other side. It is incredible. Like, no joke. This guy invented an entire fictional music scene with evolutions and branches, with 15 different entries, purely for the purpose of creating a music discussion forum and all of the discussions that would emerge from it. And I just want to, I guess, peck this guy's brain, because I think he's created one of the best, most innovative puzzle games of all time, alongside one of the most interesting ways to tell a story and tell, once again, it's a web of interlocking narratives ever. And he's done it almost by himself. Definitely had help with some of the music composition and the programming and stuff. So it's not exactly a one-man show, but he's the guy. So I'd love to sit down with him and figure out how he came to this genius idea.
That's a good answer. Can I go back to our old question? Is a website a video game? Can I say that it's something that has aged poorly? Like, retro websites are just terrible.
What, you don't like Miniclip?
I do. I guess the backgrounds in Mega Man Battle Network were that exact
Not very
thing.
good, yeah. Yeah, good question, and certainly an interesting one. Do check out Hypno Space Outlaw. It's the best. I love it. Okay, so next question is from... I guess what we'll do is we'll jump back a bit. So I've grouped the questions by name. So we're going to jump to Grothwell13, who says, if you could play any series blind again, which would it be? And why is it Dark Souls, Patrick?
Why is it Dark Souls, Patrick?
It is not Dark Souls.
What?
I do love Dark Souls to pieces, but I gotta say, my first experience with Dark Souls was not pretty. I like, honest to God, like, I got to Analondo and I stopped playing. The game got too hard. I bounced off it. This is one of those games that I played a lot and then stopped playing. I didn't enjoy it as much. I didn't get it. I didn't have much experience with this genre of character action games. Like, I'd played Devil May Cry 3, and Dark Souls is very different from Devil May Cry 3. What eventually got me into Dark Souls was the repeated effort I put into the series, and then the repeated playthroughs I did of it once I'd beaten it. That's why I appreciated Dark Souls. But I don't think I'd want to wipe my memory of this game and start from scratch, because I'd have to go through what for me was a pretty rough experience where I didn't have like a support network, which I think is important to get the most out of the game. I do have an answer for this though, James. Do you want me to go, or do you want to go first?
I'll go first. So to me, I think there's like two lines of thought that you can go through with this answer. Like, the first one is you play a game again that you love to pieces and you want to experience that for the first time again. For me, the obvious answer there would be like Resident Evil 1. Maybe I also don't think I would choose Souls. I think games that lots of the enjoyment came from how much time you spent getting good at them. Like,
mastering them. Yeah.
Losing that's painful, and it takes away the current enjoyment of easily beating them.
God, can you imagine like losing all your Dota 2 accumulated knowledge and having to start from scratch? It'd be awful, right?
That happens every patch, Patrick.
You say that, James, but there's so much.
It's not quite true.
No.
Yeah. No. But then I guess like the other answer that I would give is games that I played as a kid that I think it would be like, if I could like forget my original experience, play the game fresh as an adult, and then remember the original experience and compare them, that would be fascinating. Like, stuff
that's cool.
Like, if I played Banjo-Kazooie 1 again fresh and then compared that to, I'm like, how much of that is nostalgia?
So do you have a specific answer for this, James?
I think some 3D platformer would be the answer. I think Banjo-Kazooie is a good one, because I suspect that there are elements of the design that I would really appreciate still, but I do think a large part of my like for those games is the nostalgia, and I kind of would want to test that, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. It's not just nostalgia. It's also that these are your formative games. So they...
Yeah, like when I played them, I didn't have, a baseline of understanding, right?
Yeah, like it makes me weep tears of joy every day that I didn't grow up with JRPGs, because I could have been one of those people. I could have been one of those people defending them and thinking they were great. I could have been, but instead I grew up with good video games, and I'm so grateful and so happy.
I can't even
But
say Warrior Within because I praised it this
I
episode.
know you did. You've
Fuck.
snookered yourself. I
Yeah.
have a very easy answer for this question, actually, and that answer is
Dark
Outer
Souls.
Wilds. Dark Souls. After everything I said, it's Outer Wilds. That game is magnificent. It's a game that one of the few games that truly capture exploration in the way I wanted to. It's the kind of game that when it came out, I felt like they made it for me. Like it felt tailor made to what I've been craving in video games, which is open ended exploration that where the things you discover are meaningful. And it's so good. I the fact that you can just go anywhere from the start and you just get to figure it out on repeated loops is just such good design. I love that game to pieces. The DLC is bloody fantastic. The only problem with it is that because it's a puzzle based game and because your ability to solve the puzzle is gated by knowledge everywhere, once you've played it once, you're done. Like you can't enjoy it in the same way on repeat playthroughs. And in some ways, it's nonsensical to do a repeat playthrough because you'd have to artificially limit what you were doing, which takes away from the whole freeform exploration of the game. So it was a brilliant experience. It's fine as a one-off playthrough. Like some games are meant to be played once and that's okay. But if I could experience it again, I'd be happy. And I hope there are more games that are released like Outer Wilds. And I'm looking forward to the next game by that developer.
Maybe stuff like The Witness falls into that category, I guess.
Most
like,
puzzle games, I think.
Yeah. I actually, when you were talking about that, I did think of a real answer to this question, which I had not thought about. So, okay, so if under the condition that I can leave myself like a note or something like that to give me advice, the game I would pick is a visual novel I played a few years ago called Raging Loop. I loved that game, right, to pieces. Like, it's like 30 hours long, and I finished it in like 3 days. Not three weekend days, like 3 work days. Like, I got home at 5 every day, stayed up till like 3 a.m., forgot to have dinner, and then went to bed. Did that 3 days in a row, barely did any work a day because I was like thinking about the game those 3 days. And that game has like a really bad ending, like to the point where it like some bad endings, it's like, oh, that was bad, but the rest of the game was good. That game's bad ending kind of undermines the rest of the game. It's like it's a mystery, right? It's a visual novel that's a time loop mystery, about solving murders. And the final reveals really bring everything down like a lot, which, to me, that was like my favorite game in years when I played that and then up until the ending. So play that game and then stop halfway through.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be biased towards story and puzzle games for these kinds of questions, right? Because you experience them the best the first time through. So we're gonna duck back to Drew now because he had a follow-up to this question asking same question, but instead of blind, what series would you play blindfolded? Which ended up being a more interesting question for me to think about than I originally thought.
Yeah, I have like a trouble trying to figure out like an answer to this. Like you need a lot of auditory stimulus in order to do that, or it needs to be like short and you need to be able to memorize the actions.
Or both, right? I've got an easy answer to this.
Okay.
Doom 1. Doom, baby. 1993 Doom. Heaps of audio because you've got all of the monster noises. You can hump walls to give you audio cues by pressing space. You can shoot the monsters to give you more audio cues. And the levels are very short. Like when you look at the speedruns of these levels, like most of them are under 30 seconds. Now, would I do a blindfold run of any game ever? Probably not. But I think that Doom 1, with me enjoying FPS kind of movement, it's the kind of thing that I could do. I reckon that's a game for me.
I'll buy you dinner multiple times if you finish Doom 2 with a blindfold.
Oh my god, that one level with the pits where you have to go along. Oh my god. I think it's interesting because I don't think this is something I would do, but when I'm thinking
Barrels
about
of
like
fun.
barrels of fun, oh my god. But don't you think that like it's the kind of game that you could realistically do it because it's short, there are audio cues, and you've got a lot of different ways to orientate and figure out your axis of movement?
I was almost tempted to pick one of the Thief games for this, and then I
Oh
was
my
like,
god,
man, there are so
what?
many ones that are bad. I was like,
Dude,
that game...
Thief has like you have to steal 90% of the loot. So you want to
Yeah, I was like,
would
wait a
spend-
second, that's a
Oh,
terrible idea.
that is the worst answer. Oh my god.
What about a point and click adventure that has like...
Oh,
just, like...
that's interesting.
See, I'm just trying to pick games that are easy, not games that are fun. I don't think I could...
I think you need something with strong audio cues. That's what makes it fun because then you're not like you can't see, but there are other ways to orientate yourself, you know? Like if you once you train yourself to pick up on those audio cues as meaningful and you've memorized the level geometry in your head. I'm also going to take this opportunity to recommend my favorite summoning salt video that he's ever done. He kind of does like history of speedruns, and that's the history of blindfolded punch out. And it's awesome because when people first started doing the blindfold punch out run, it was, you know, the old how they have those speedrun convention things, James. So the very first iterations of that was like 8 people on a couch, like, and then it got to 20 people on a couch and so on and so forth. But basically, the guy who did the punch out speedrun as a joke was like, all right, it's time for the blindfold punch out speedrun. And, you know, he lost on level 2. And so this history of this speedrun starts off with this joke one where they didn't really know what they were doing, to people figuring out how to blindfold just get through the game, and then the history of people constantly refining how to complete it in faster and faster times. And I think it's incredible that it went from something so ridiculous to a genuinely, you know, tightly contested speedrun category. It's a great video.
I've thought of 2 answers actually. The first one is a bit of a cheat, but I think it would be really fun, is if there was a mod for Typing of the Dead that read out the words on the screen. That would be fun. It would be like a touch typing, and then that leads into, I guess you could do something like Zork 1, because you just need to memorize the text that you have to type in to progress. That would be
you make a typo easy. And you get stuck for 3 hours.
Yeah. And you have no idea. And then I reckon you could do the Stanley Parable blindfolded.
Actually, that's a good answer. I like that.
Yeah, because it's all voice prompts and the rooms are very small corridors and you can't really get lost. If you just go in a direction, you'll be like, I found the broom closet ending.
This also reminds me, I saw this great clip of this guy who was blindfold speedrunning Ocarina of Time, which to me, in theory, seems insane because that's crazy.
Isn't that game easy because you just do the skip at the start that teleports you to the end?
Yeah, no, this was no skip. But the idea is he uses the grappling hook thing to I guess figure out the distances, because the longer it takes to make the noise, the longer it does. Anyway, the funny part about this is he accidentally did a glitch out of bounds. And obviously he wasn't aware of this, and he spends like 10 minutes being incredibly confused as to what is going on, because he's obviously memorized the entire game at this point, and he just for the life of him cannot figure out where he is because he's relying on the audio to orientate him, and it's all like completely different from anything it should be. So he keeps like thinking he figures it out, then getting completely tripped up. It's very good. I'll add that in the show notes as well. Blindfold speedruns are funny. I like them, although would I do one? Probably
not. Good question, Drew. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's all from Drew. So thank you for those questions, Drew. I think we'll do a couple more questions, James, and then we'll go to a music break.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to Sinus R2, and this is a bit of a chunky question, but I'm going to read it in full. What do you think of the wave of retro-style games that became so popular in recent years? By this, I mean games that try to imitate the look, feel, and gameplay of old games like Iron Fury, Dusk, Thimbleweed Park, maybe Bloodstained, the AVGN games, Shredder's Revenge, etc. What, in your opinions, are the do's and don'ts in regards to making these games? Are you getting tired of them? And what changes to the current approach would you suggest moving forward to keep this genre, in inverted commas, relevant, or are they fine as they are? Then he adds, I, for one, used to get excited about every one of them initially, but due to that oversaturation of recent years, less so now. They still might catch my attention if it's a genre I like or used to play a lot. He also says that we should review one of these for a bonus
Okay.
episode.
This is interesting because I have mixed opinions on this. So there's been a number of good ones, right? Like to me, the one that stands out actually is something like Shovel Knight, which I thought was excellent. I don't know if this counts, but Streets of Rage 4 was really good, and it's basically like the exact same game, but a bit better than as 2. And I think the Ninja Turtle one was also supposed to be quite good. I don't know if that counts because it's just really just a sequel, but it does feel like it's trying to like imitate some of that old stuff.
Yeah, it's a sequel, but not a sequel that's tried to, I
Reinvent the
guess, keep
wheel.
up with
Yeah.
modern gameplay trends. It's like that game could have conceivably come out 2 or 3 years after the original in a lot of ways, right?
Which I was really
Yeah.
fond of. For ones that didn't do it for me, I guess Ukulele being the primary one, I thought was kind of disappointing. And for things I wish that would change is I would like to. I'm really getting tired of SNES style graphics, basically. Something that I've noticed is that there's a bunch of sprite based games on the PS2. Even after 2D stuff was falling out of popularity, that looks really cool. And everything that emulates 2D does this like pixel art style from like forever ago updated. But nothing kind of captures that style, I guess, because so few games were coming out at that time. I would really like to see some throwbacks to that era.
I think it's in part it's because it's much
I
harder.
agree.
Like when you increase like I think we mentioned this in the Symphony of the Night episode, because the graphics designers were used to making pixel art. When Symphony of the Night came out, these were people who had been like they'd mastered the pixel art, and then all of a sudden they get told they get to, I don't know, was it quadruple their pixel count? And Symphony of the Night comes out and it looks fucking amazing and still does to this day. I don't think your random indie game developer who's never done a video game before is probably capable of doing something on the quality of Symphony of the Night. Like they just don't have that wealth of experience. Yeah, so I agree with you, particularly with the graphics. I am a bit softer on graphics specifically just because it's a good way for indie developers to not be limited by budget. So I do think, yes, I also am a bit tired of a lot of those retro graphics, but at the same time,
It's understandable, right?
forgiving to. Yeah, it's understandable, yeah. And I think it can be saved by art direction, but yeah, when it all starts looking the same, it's. Have you seen like Blasphemous, the art for Blasphemous?
Yes.
It's like a 2D, yeah, like that's a game which probably is closer to Symphony of the Night in terms of art style, and that game does pull it off, I'll tell you that.
I tried playing it. I was not a huge fan, honestly.
Me neither, but the aesthetics of that
incredible.
game are fucking insane. Yeah. Taking a step back, I have a broader answer to this question. So I've played a lot of these retro throwback games, particularly in the first-person shooter space. I've played Iron Fury, Dusk, and Medieval, Proteus.
Oh, you must love that because it's getting rid of all of that cinematic bullshit that bogged the genre down, right?
I do like that, yes. But more broad, but at the same time, I have to say I agree with Sinus that there are aspects of this where I am getting a bit fatigued by it. And I actually, the latest one I played, Proteus, I only probably got about a third to halfway through it before I stopped. And I was thinking about it, and I think it's important to look at why it is that these games seem so enticing. And I think it's because this genre or subgenre of FPS games died out. Like we saw the continue, like FPS games continue to exist, but this style of FPS games, this genre, it died. That they were not making games like that anymore, and so it's less about nostalgia, I think, with these games, and more about more of a genre that we haven't seen the likes of for 20 years. And I think if you understand in that sense, it all of a sudden makes a lot of sense. I do think that there is a problem when the genre doesn't try to innovate, though, which is where the fatigue and the feelings of nostalgia start to set in. And I think the games that tend to stand out are the ones which take the principles of these old games and elevate them into something new. The example I'd use here actually isn't exactly the same, but to kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about, there was a standalone DLC for Prey release called Moon Crash. And what Moon Crash does is that it fuses a roguelike structure with the immersive sim design philosophy of Prey, which is kind of heavily based on System Shock 2. And that combination of genres was a match made in heaven. It's more what I want to see from these indie game developers is more of that. Obviously, I like immersive sims. Obviously, I like these retro FPS games, but I don't want to be playing the same game with a slight tweak for the next 20 years. I want to see new and inspired and interesting takes on these games that have evolved or taken from the principles of what made the original game so good. And I think Prey Moon Crash is something that is devastating that we haven't seen more iteration and evolution on, with Depth Loop in particular being a
I
massive
feel like
disappointment.
Undertale is kind of like that, right? Like it's
Great
it's like
example.
it takes what what was good about stuff like Earthbound and Mother 3 and then adds its own layer to make it stand out, right? I think that's really
Yeah.
important.
Undertale is I love that example because at the end of the day, Undertale's story is friendship is magic. Like it really is. It's about being lovely and friendly to everyone, and that's the best way to get a good ending and happiness for everyone, right? But it innovates in the gameplay space. It's like, you know what? We need bullet hell in
And
our
murder.
in our JRPG and murder. And I don't know. I think that yes, Undertale is a great example of understanding the principles of what made those games good, which is probably the things underlying the story, and then improving and radically innovating in areas where those games suck dick. So, yeah, Undertale, great example of something that evolves. What makes the
Yeah,
genre
just
great as
don't
well.
make your twist be making it open world. I'm very, very tired of that.
Yeah. Oh, another game that I want to mention here quickly is Gloomwood. I don't know if I've spoken to you
That's
about
the
Gloomwood at
thief
all,
one, right?
James. Yeah, but it's not Thief. It kind of, what I would say is it seems to be like, if I had to say, it's like a cross between
Every time you
classic
mention this
Resi
game, I think you're
and
talking
Thief.
about Darkwood, which is the survival horror game. And
Yeah, which also looks incredible,
yeah,
by the way. I need to give that a go, but I did try and it was too scary, so I stopped.
it's $4 right now.
I'm a
Maybe I should
wuss,
buy it.
Jays. It's pretty scary, just putting it out there, which you wouldn't think is possible from a 2D top-down game, but
It's all
man,
in the
it
sound
is freaky.
design, right?
Yeah, yes, I will give it another go. But yeah, so Gloomwood, I think, takes, and I've only played the demo, so haven't seen the final product, but it takes a lot of what makes Thief interesting and then goes in a different direction with it, which is what I want, and I think what most people more want than another copy of Thief 2. So basically New Blood Interactive with all their games is on the right track. Just do what they do and you'll be in a good spot. All right, music break time, James.
What have
My
you picked?
choice.
What old game soundtrack are we going with, Pat?
Oh, we're doing old games, are we? No. We're gonna do new games in a sense. Year ago, a couple of years ago, James, the Binding of Isaac released its last major update, which is Repentance, which is basically there was a mod for Binding of Isaac called Afterbirth, and Ed McMillan is like, yeah, we're going to put this entire mod into the main game.
No.
So he hired the mod team and they just fused it together and it basically doubled the size of the game. It's just absolutely insane. And it includes an entire new soundtrack. And the best song in that soundtrack by far, and the best aesthetics of that level is
I
Downpour,
agree with that,
which
actually.
I think it's River of Despair. River of Despair is the song name. So Binding of Isaac is a game that James and I love a lot. We've played it shitloads. I actually think it's secretly a mini immersive sim in a lot of ways, which unfortunately by the end game is just a DPS race, but a lot of the early game strategizing of that
I still
game
don't
is
understand what
immersive
that
sim
genre
like.
means. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, it just makes me sound smart every time I say it, James. That's a real critical thing to
Is Euro
understand
Truck
about it.
Simulator an immersive sim? It's both a sim and
It's a
immersive.
sim and
Yeah.
immersive. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I saw a Reddit thread like that where someone was asking for recommendations for immersive sim, and it was just a big argument about what an immersive sim was or what a sim was. Half the people are like, "Yeah, there's this farming simulator game you should check out," and they were not joking. They were
It
just,
occupies the same. It's like the same thing with RPG, where the genre name like makes no sense and could be anything.
yeah. Disco Elysium is an RPG, as is yes, Oath of
Absolutely.
Felghana, right?
I don't think Oath is
Same
actually an
game.
RPG.
Yeah, see, this is exactly what I wanted. Anyway, this is River of Despair from Downpour Binding of Isaac. So that was Rivers of Despair from Binding of Isaac. We're going to keep trucking along. Next question is from Daxter. What is a game or genre you guys don't like but wish you liked? Why don't you like it, and why do you wish you would? So I'll go first here. For me, it's easily the classic point and click adventure games. Many of these have awesome writing and charm, but I just cannot get into the gameplay. I just find that the gameplay grinds to this weird halt when you don't know what to do, and it's incredibly frustrating. It's this weird issue of not even knowing what the puzzle is a lot of the time. With modern puzzle design, it's usually very clear what the objective you're trying to achieve is. With these older ones, it can be so esoteric that you can be just completely clueless. And I have to say that unlike something like JRPGs,
Hmm?
I want to like these. Like I've played the original Monkey Island game, and I think it's hilarious. I want to get more into these, and I would love to play them more and enjoy them. But when I think about actually physically playing them, I kind of I just lose all interest. So I kind of want to experience them in a cheaty way, where I get all of the good feelings, but can skip the bad. But on balance, just don't like these classic point and click adventure games, and I don't
I
think
don't think I
ever
can
will.
pick a genre. I feel like there's probably a game in any genre that I could point to as saying that I like. I guess for games in particular that I don't like, but I wish I did, probably like Armored Core 1 or something like that, like those games I didn't enjoy super, but I feel like
Hmm.
if I feel like they're like a genre that I could enjoy. Maybe, they recently announced the new one, which I'm actually interested in.
On my
Yeah,
wish
so
list.
maybe that's an answer to that, but there isn't any that I hate particularly that I would like to like. The only games that I like despise, I don't particularly want to enjoy them. So, yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah, and I mean that's a good thing. It means that you've got confidence in your convictions. So thanks for the question, Dexter. Now we're going back to Hodor Gorgon, and he asks, I love listening to the co-op episode on Chaos Theory when I found your podcast this year. So I was wondering, would you guys consider streaming a co-op game this coming year, either a retro game or a modern title? And what genre would you consider? I've got an answer for this. I have a specific answer. So I'll say straight up, probably not streaming. I think that I've got nothing against streaming, but I find playing games to be kind of personal in some way, I guess. So I enjoy experiencing them,
I'd be
just
happy to
myself,
do
or if I'm playing a
recorded
co-op game just
content
with a buddy.
live, I think.
Yeah, but not live streaming. Also, logistically, it's just there's a whole bunch of time management issues which I don't even want to think about. So streaming is probably off the table. However, I would love to do another co-op game, and in fact, James, I've got a specific game in mind, and that game is Guild
Ooh,
Wars
I thought
1.
you were going to say Halo 2.
No, Halo 2 is one I'd love to inflict upon you, and it is one I'd like to do with you, but Guild Wars 1 is the one I'm more interested in doing. So Guild Wars 1, when it came out, the thing that defined this game is that it was an MMO in inverted commas that was uh, only required a single purchase fee. This was an MMO with no subscription fee. Of course, it wasn't really an MMO because the only thing that had player gatherings were the towns. Everything else was instanced. But, I was too stupid to understand that when I was a kid. Luckily, the game, I remember playing that game and loving it. My favorite part of it is the class system. There are 8 classes in the game, and to make your class, you pick 2 of them. So there's a crazy diversity in classes you can do, and all of the main story content is designed to be played by 4 players. So I was thinking, James, it might be a very fun thing if we can. I've already roped in my roommate to play with us, but if we can rope in one other person, it might be a fun thing to complete all of the story content in Guild Wars 1. I would also say the additional caveat I would put on this game, which I think would actually make it interesting, is that we wouldn't be allowed to look up any
I think
outside
that'll be
assistance,
fun,
no
yeah.
guides, no add-ons. Just have to deal with the game as it's presented, get through the game as it's presented, pick our classes as we choose, and just figure it all out as we're playing. And I think
Man,
that
I
would
feel
be
like
a
I
damn
just
good
picked the
time.
worst like sounding combination of classes and just hope it worked, because even if it doesn't, you guys have to
You
carry
fucking
me
would.
through the game. The ledge weight.
And I think the game. Well, honestly, James, let's be honest. How much MMOs have you
One.
played compared to me? You played a lot of it. I'm gonna be the dead weight here. Let's just be completely honest. I'm gonna have no idea what I'm doing. So you'll be carrying me even if you pick the shittiest class.
I think that'd be fun, actually.
Yeah, the only problem is it's a pretty long game, but definitely I think that there are things about that game which I think are fascinating, and they kind of didn't do with Guild Wars 2, which kind of turned into a more traditional MMO in a lot of ways. So
Something
yeah,
I'd be
I'd like to give
more
that a go.
interested in doing, actually, rather than a co op game, I think would be a single player game
Hmm.
where, like a strategy game or something like that, with 2 people making the decisions at the same time. I think that'd be fun to talk through the decision making processes.
Oh, like we play Alpha
Yeah, yeah, and we
Centauri.
argue about what to do.
Right, so one person's streaming and the other's, giving
Yeah,
input. That's an
ages
interesting idea. I
ago, I
wouldn't
was
mind doing
thinking
that
about
either.
like if I play Isaac and you talk me through it, you have a better understanding of that game. That was a while ago. Stuff like that, I
Yeah.
think it'd be more fun. I find co-op to be a bit frustrating actually, because I've played so much multiplayer. When you're in single player co-op, there's lots of, well, maybe it's just because Splinter Cell was like this, but there's lots of like waiting for the other person that I'm very impatient.
What I kind of like about the idea of Guild Wars 1 with not looking up extra information and just playing at the same time is that no one would get ahead of the other players in terms of their
Yes.
understanding of the game. So I just feel like there'd be a lot of experimentation and figuring shit out and helping one another, and kind of like the spirit of playing those games more casually with friends instead of the optimization struggle that I think a lot of MMOs are nowadays. So maybe it'd be a way to capture that original magic that is now impossible in the face of the internet's
Absolutely. So
widespread
yeah,
knowledge.
I'd be down to do it. It's just a matter of time and what.
Yeah, I think the co-op experiment was fun. So we'll definitely repeat it in
Yes.
some way, shape, or form. Exactly what that form is, I'm not sure yet. All right. So next question is from Lions of the Nostalgia Goggles podcast. We had his co-host George in for Mushihime Sama, and they were kind enough to have me as a guest on that show for StarCraft 1 because James is a loser and wouldn't let me
Yes.
pick it for this show, despite it being a great game,
Mm-hmm.
strategy games, etc. His question is there a game, new or old, you've ever been afraid to play because thought you'd be too into it?
This is a hard one for me. I don't have the only thing that comes to mind is maybe something like Eve Online. I reckon I would be the kind of thing that would like
Hmm.
get sucked into, and then not be able to get out.
I think, yeah, for you in particular, I think that is
Yeah,
a real
but
fear.
I tend to get lost in big, complex games anyway, so it's not like I avoid them.
Hmm. You don't
Yeah,
fear it, James. You
exactly. If
embrace
this
it.
game doesn't involve like 10,000 hours of research, I'm not interested.
Exactly. See, the answer for a regular human being, if James was one, would be Dota 2.
Or
But
like
for James, it's
StarCraft.
not because he wanted to get lost in that game. Yeah. See, for me, the answer, I guess, is a bit more general. It's like 1v1 multiplayer games. So, like StarCraft 1, fighting games, even chess to some degree, because I am a little worried about just that becoming my life. Like, if I were to play, particularly chess is something that I've put a decent amount of effort into, and I could just keep sinking more and more and more effort into it. There's no limit to the amount of study or practice you can do in chess. But ultimately, you have to decide at some point, and particularly with the podcast, you want to diversify your interests to a greater degree, spread it around more games and more activities. And if I was to properly get into something like chess or 1v1 StarCraft, it would come at the cost of other hobbies and activities and games. So any 1v1 multiplayer game I have stayed away from because at least in group multiplayer games, if you lose it for a while, it doesn't matter because you've got other people to pick up your slack. In 1v1 games, you have no one to blame but
Man,
yourself.
I'm like
So,
the opposite. It's like when I'm not doing the podcast, I'm like, I do so many single player games for the show. I basically only
mm,
play like multiplayer live service in my free time these days because it's like that desire to play single player stuff is fulfilled like perpetually because of all like we play like so many games, right? That I don't constantly
yeah.
feel the need to play more. Um, and I haven't had like a huge interest in modern big budget releases recently, so really it's just me
Mm.
sinking dozens of hours into Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that.
Yeah, so for me, like that multiplayer thing, I kind of enjoy the social aspect more
Yes.
nowadays. So playing Valorant or Overwatch with friends, and more recently, I've played a lot of poker. And poker for me is more of a social activity I do with my friends, once a month, or I'll occasionally go to the casino to play. But that's how I view that spare time. But yeah, for me, yeah, definitely the 1v1 side of it is something I'm worried about. Okay, next question is from Asa. He asks, "Are there any games that you have come across in the years that will just not fit within the 20-hour time limit you've given yourselves, but intrigued you so much that you had to
Yes,
play
I
them?"
have a couple of answers to this one actually. So the first answer to
Hmm.
this question, well, both of the answers to this question are actually the games that inspired my comment on the retro throwback question, where, like, basically, I really like 2D games from the PS2 era because everyone was so obsessed with 3D. Finding nice looking 2D stuff with interesting mechanics and stuff like that is like, my dream. Also, Patrick refuses to play JRPGs, so it's generally just that as well. So, my answer to this question is Mana Khemia and the Alchemists of Alrevis, which is a PS2 game which is actually in the Atelier series, about a bunch of students at alchemy school doing student stuff. Like there's a weekly schedule, and the point is every week they give you something to craft, and then you need to spend the rest of the week figuring out how to make that thing. The thing that got me to play it originally was that I heard the gameplay loop was really cool, and it fucking is. It's awesome. So the thing that ties it all together is that it has like a really each character has a very big skill tree like thing, kind of like the sphere grid even from FF10, except the paths between the nodes are locked. And the way you unlock the nodes is that every single lock says to open this lock, you have to craft this item. So what you do is you look at the skill tree and you go, I want to get that ability. And then you figure out how to craft it. You're like, oh, I need this item, and this item. You go, you kill the monsters, you make the thing, and then you get the item that makes you stronger. So you can kill more powerful stuff to make more items, to unlock more talents, it's like it never stops. And the game's got a real big emphasis on like experimentation and that kind of thing. And the battle animations are great. The characters are funny. It's very silly. Feels like one of these games that could only exist in that time period. The only problem is it's painfully easy. Much easier than Lunar, for example. Like it's very easy. And the only thing that, like, I didn't finish it, but I kept playing because the battle system has these really cool, like, narrative wrinkles to it that are, like, funny and gameplay affecting. So, for example, one of the party members is a ghost. She's haunting the school, and you find her and you convince her to join the party. So, if she gets killed in combat, she comes back, like, 2 turns later on full health because she's already dead, for example. Yeah, stuff like that. Or there's this character who, whenever they kill a monster, they put them in their pocket. And you can, like, all of their moves are items that from things that you've killed. Like, you just throw an elephant, stuff like stupid stuff like that. It's really funny. So I like that game a lot. But we would never do it from the show because Patrick's a grouch.
I agree. For me, I have mostly been a good boy and held off playing games I want to play in the hope that they would someday be played for the show. But I finally cracked, and just over the past week or so, I've started playing Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. A game that I have tried to start on a number of occasions, but never got very far. But this time, I am getting far, and I'm confident I'm going to finish it. It's a game we could still do for the show eventually. But yeah, this is an FPS game which has, it's interesting. Its influence is more in the realm of battle royales like Escape from Tarkov than it has a single player legacy. I don't really think it was until like Metro, people say, is inspired by Stalker, but I don't think it really was until the third game, which has some fantastic bits that are better than anything I've done in Stalker, to be fair. But it's an FPS space that is very underexplored, and I just kind of wanted that semi-open world FPS experience. And on balance, even though I have some significant problems with it so far, I'm still enjoying it a lot. Yeah, so definitely, if I can make James play it one day for the podcast and have some time off, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, maybe.
See. Asa goes on to say, has playing retro games affected your perspective on modern games in any way? Do you notice cool throwbacks, and do mechanics start to blend together?
It's interesting. It's rare that I see something brand new, but there's definitely like, I don't have this sense that some people are like, all old games are good and all new games suck. I don't have that opinion at all. I think that there's lots of old games that have unique things about them that have not been replicated since, for sure. That and it does, and they do them in really interesting ways. Um, I just think it's a very case by case thing. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, interestingly, and I know it's a big identity thing for some people that old stuff is better, but I don't think that that's the case. I think it's different.
I guess the way to answer this question is to say the main thing that playing all this old games has done for me is I feel like it's broadened my education on the
Yes.
history of video games, because it's quite cool when you get this breadth of knowledge playing a lot of these influential video games. You can kind of track where and when things came from and how they became popularized and everything from there. So it's not really that they've affected my perspective, I guess, playing all these games, except that it's given me a better understanding of how the puzzle of the history of video games is fits together. And there are still a shitload of games I haven't played. I'm nowhere near an expert on all video games, but I feel a lot better educated now that I've played those old
Yeah,
games
it's
than
like
I
a
used to
big
be.
library of stuff that we can compare Dark Souls. Yeah.
Exactly. You have stuff pre
Yeah.
Dark Souls and stuff post Dark Souls. It's like the AD
Yeah.
BC marker.
Uh, well, I guess it is
uh
interest. The thing it is most interesting, and we brought it up a bit before, but it's seen like genres that don't really exist now, like kind of the things that people have learnt don't do very well. Is kind of an interesting aspect, and it's sad in some ways. Like, I wish there was hundreds of Archimedean Dynasty clones, and there's not. But it is kind of fascinating finding really good games that aren't super popular.
and I will say once again to sing Dark Souls
Oh,
praises
so
to
we're
high
doing that
heavens. One
unironically
of the
now. Okay.
reasons, unironically, yeah, one of the reasons Dark Souls is important from a historical point of view is that it was a rejection of a lot of the philosophy that underpinned AAA game design at the time. Because Dark Souls did the literal opposite of everything that every other big name game was doing, and not only was it successful, it was widely regarded as brilliant. Like, not just good, but one of the best games ever made at the time it was created. And it demonstrated that there was an audience of people out there who were after the more non mainstream gaming experience. So, yeah, I think that basically, I think playing these older games has made me better understand and appreciate what Dark Souls was trying to accomplish. So it's made me appreciate it even more with every passing year, which is,
Yeah, I
always a
guess quality of life and accessibility are things that I've been able to like think about and study like what is good and bad about it, because there was definitely a period where like that period you're talking about where I think with the rise of mobile gaming, or like at least phones to
Hmm.
begin with, there was this huge pendulum swing towards making everything very
Casual, accessible,
yeah, but I don't
mainstream.
think that the lessons from that era are all to be disregarded. Like stuff like
No,
the way saving is handled, the reduction of insta deaths, the removal of life systems, that kind of thing, relics of the arcade era. Getting rid of stuff like that, I thought was probably a positive step for the industry. It's less about accessibility in a you know, absolute sense, and more like doing it in the right parts of the game.
the way I'd put it is that I think the reason a lot of people felt alienated in that time period, which I would typify as like 2005 to 2012 or 2011, is that the indie scene didn't exist in the same way it does today. There was the gaming industry, and it was a lot smaller in terms of scope and developers and everything. So when the gaming industry moved to this more mainstream casual focus, it felt like, for me at least, that they weren't making games for me anymore. All the things that I liked about gaming, they were no longer catering to me. They were catering to a different kind of player. And there wasn't anything to fill the void because the indie
That
scene
was
didn't
also around the
exist.
period that the Wii
That
existed.
movement Yeah, and it was all part and parcel of it, right? And I think that's why people get upset. Not because mainstream gaming existed. The more people get into gaming, the better. Casual gaming is fantastic. We should continue to push this. It's just that we needed the indie gaming scene to really flourish so that there was games
Yeah.
for everyone. And before it felt like that we saw a shift of games for your more traditional gamers to more casual gamers, and there was nothing for the more traditional gamers, or at least there was a lot
Yes.
less. But nowadays you can get any kind of game you like, and complaining about mainstream games or complaining about games being more
Yep.
accessible is nonsensical, because regardless of how you feel about those games, there will be a hardcore, ridiculously stupid punishing game for you. You just need to look for it. So don't whinge about nowadays about what's being done in the mainstream. You just need to look elsewhere, and you will find
Yeah, it's
lots of
like
good stuff.
those people who say there's no good music anymore. It's like there is thousands of things you have not explored.
There's, if anything, like the problem nowadays is discoverability, right?
I
Like
actually
that's
think
the
that
new issue.
issue
Like,
has gotten a lot better in the last 5 years or so. I remember how bad Steam used to be. I think that all of the changes they've made recently makes finding stuff to play way easier. They're getting really good at that kind of thing, I think.
unfortunately, my discovery queues on Steam are still about 50% porn games, and I think that's all because I played Steins
No,
Gate
no,
and
no.
Ace
That's I think
Attorney.
that's the case
So,
for
so
everyone. I think the trending search box is always going to be filled with that stuff, just because so many people click on it for a laugh. It's like
right.
guaranteed to rise to the top off of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I'm basically, yeah, to answer your question, it hasn't really
Yes.
affected my perspective. I'd say it's broadened my perspective. Hexity asks, are there any games that you've played specifically for the podcast that you would have loved to have loved but just couldn't? I've got an easy one for
Is
this
it
one,
Luna?
James. How could it ever be Luna? What? The answer, the real
Street
answer,
Fighter?
and one you, what, I like
Well, I
Street
don't know if
Fighter.
you loved it though.
I recommended it. Anyway, the real answer is Eternal
That's one of my
Darkness.
answers too, actually.
Yeah, it's a game that on paper is everything I love, and in practice was just not a very good video game, and I didn't enjoy it very much, and I'm very disappointed. I think that yeah, that was a game I was really looking forward to, and I ended up
I
just
reckon if I
not
played
liking
that
it.
game as a kid, I would have loved all the stupid gimmicks.
I can agree with that, and I think that I would have been less bothered by the kind of like non-Lovecraftian story that's still presented as one, and I wouldn't have noticed how repetitive the gameplay was, even if as the
Yeah,
aesthetic was changing. But and you know how repetitive the level design was. Oh my god, just thinking about it now, just those endless hallways over and over again. Lots of interesting ideas just did not come together in a meaningful way for me. But I'm sure there's a version of a game in some universe where it did come
I
together
agree with that. I
properly.
think I would have enjoyed it a lot if I had played it when it came out. So my other answer is Tyrion 2000, actually.
Hmm.
So I reckon this is another game where if I had played it when it came out, I would have loved it to bits. However, having played what I think is a better shoot 'em up in the same year, um, my opinion was just colored a bit. I think that game's soundtrack is still like fantastic to this day. But there's just something about it didn't sit right with me. It's just I'm too in love with this other game and I can't look past that basically. But I think
Hmm.
it's good. Um
Yeah, I Tyrion is actually a great answer because that game was fine and enjoyable, but I didn't really get the hype. It was fun, but I'd put it like far below Star Fox 64,
well,
for
yeah, and
example.
it's got all of that hidden stuff in there. I feel like it's the kind of game that because we're reviewing it in a 2 week period or whatever, like if it's the kind of game that I sink into and play for a few weeks, I think I would explore all that stuff more. I feel like I'm
Hmm.
just rushing past not rushing past, but lots of the extra fluff I don't have time for, basically.
So thank you for the question, Hexity. Okay, so now we're going on to Our good friend Ben, otherwise known as Do Baldur's Gate to You Cowards, something that we still refuse to do all these years later, and will hopefully continue to do so he never changes his name. Are there any games you'd like to do but haven't because emulation fails to properly capture an aspect of the original? What impact generally do you feel emulating has on your experience versus playing on the
Well, this is
original hardware?
easy. It makes it vastly better.
Well, I just first let's answer the first part of that question first, James, because
Okay.
my answer is no, because I haven't played, handheld games or Wii games. But I know you already have an answer for this because you've told me you want to play this one game, but that we have to do it on the original 3DS
The original
handheld.
DS handheld, actually. The World Ends With You, I think, would
Right.
be. Well, I've played the remakes that aren't on the original hardware, and I hate them because the original was so cool and interesting. And I think DS, 3DS games in particular are like super interesting because their hardware really, isn't matched anywhere else. So that and Wii games maybe my big answers for that one. Maybe light gun games or like
Oh,
yeah
yeah, that's
yeah
a good one.
or weird rhythm games.
I've kind of been interested in doing a Professor Layton game. Do they use the
Yes,
DS
I've played one. Yeah,
hardware
I'd love to play another
much?
one.
Yeah, I'd like to give them a go because they seem fun and also the kind of thing that I could play in bits and pieces pretty easily without dedicating a big play sesh to it. For the second part, James, you're completely right. Emulating has made this show. Well, firstly, it's made this show possible, which is
You know
which
how
is a good thing. You and
expensive games
I
got over the pandemic? It's insane. Like,
are just not game collectors. A lot of these other retro podcasts, I feel like they're very, and there's nothing wrong with this, but they're very concerned with the, I guess, physical owning of the game or the hardware and all those bits and pieces. Whereas I feel like our focus is very much on the playing of the video game, and that's where I want it to remain. When hardware influences the playing of the video game, obviously I do care and it's something to consider. But broadly speaking, I don't think I'm ever going to buy like a PS1 to experience a game on PS1 on a CRT. I'm just not going to do that. Emulating it is a zillion
yeah,
times
or
easier.
buying a remaster on the Switch, like with Star Wars Republic Commando. Oh,
Hmm.
that was a mistake. Should have emulated that one.
Yeah, well, didn't you? What was it? It was something to do with the audio, was scuffed? I can't remember.
It was just a bit weird to control, I guess. It wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
Also, trying to play Baldur's Gate 2 on the PS4 was very funny.
What a great choice. Apparently, Disco is fine on consoles though, although
I
it's
mean,
still
that's
probably better on
probably
PC.
fine. I don't see any reason.
Wait, is it even
It's
on
definitely on
consoles?
Switch. I'm sure it is.
Oh yeah, it is on Switch. Yeah. So yeah, overall emulating is fantastic. But for at least in my history of playing video games, it's been mouse and keyboard all the way. And even when it hasn't been mouse and keyboard, I've wanted it to be mouse and keyboard. I'm a big fan of how the Wii now has mouse and keyboard support in all the emulators, so I can just even play those games. Although something like Wii Golf may
It
not
was
be
so
as
sad the
enjoyable.
Wii
What do
U
you reckon,
failed.
James?
That console was cool. It was like there was so much stuff that could be done that can't be now. It's like a lot. It's like
Yeah, the Switch has
yeah, it's
replaced it, right?
like yeah. I hope the Switch 2 has a second screen.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. All right, we're on the home stretch now. Just two questions to go, James. The first one is by Augmented. They ask, do you find that older games have something that newer games don't? If yes, what is it, and why do you think it's lacking from newer games? If no, do you find that games are generally worse, better, or just different than, say, 25 years ago? To cap it off, are you hopeful for the future of gaming, namely AAA games, or do you think only indies will ever be the ones experimenting with new and interesting ideas?
um, I kind of touched on part of this before.
Hmm.
I think it's just different. As for the AAA and indie thing, I don't want to say never, but there is basically zero reason for a AAA developer to take a big risk these days, right?
Hmm.
Like, I think if you have lots of money, like, you may as well just play it safe with stuff that you know is going to sell because you can just do what Valve did with Portal or what Riot did with Auto Chess is you just wait for some average Joe to make the next big thing, and then you buy them out, and then you develop the thing as the main publisher. You don't need to invest money in experimenting with hundreds of different like things that may or not sell.
Yeah, you do what Apex Legends did, right? Like it saw Battle Royale was a thing. It got a team to refine the Battle Royale formula into something very
Yep.
specific and extremely polished. They announced the game and released it on basically the same day, and it was a roaring success. Why would you ever do anything other than that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I do wish that some like I like when companies take risks. It's unlikely to me. I understand why, but yeah, I'm not hopeful in that sense, I guess. But I do think that there is probably a lot of interesting new stuff to discover moving forward still. We're still, I think there's a lot of space that's been explored in the medium,
Mm.
but I think there is still lots of space to explore.
Yeah, I think one of the keys of this question, you know how you said you think games are just different? I think games are
Yes,
definitely just different and we should, evaluate them as just different pieces of art. But I think it's fair to say that AAA games are less interesting than they used to be.
I agree with
Yeah.
that. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
they've got less innovation, more copying, more open worlds.
I guess to quickly name examples, would you say like Death Stranding and Doom Eternal were examples of like
Innovation
games
in the
that took
gameplay space,
risks?
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And this is coming from someone who doesn't even like Doom Eternal. My perspective on Doom Eternal is that even if I bounced off it and didn't enjoy the resource management heavy style of that game, I think they took a concept and refined it and did something really interesting with it and ramped it up to 11, and
Yeah.
props to them. My problem with a lot of the discussion about Doom Eternal is that it's
It's so
like,
divisive. It's
well,
so
well, a
funny.
lot of people say this is the best FPS ever made. This has redefined what FPSs are, and I'm like, well, no, this is like a very specific niche FPS in a lot of ways. Like it's a very narrow thing that, and for me, a game like Dusk is a far better and more interesting FPS for my personal sensibilities, with which is more about you controlling your pace through interestingly designed levels. Whereas Doom Eternal is all about a very specific combat system, which is closer to Devil May Cry.
Devil May
Yeah,
Cry, yeah,
yeah, so,
is a first person
yeah,
shooter,
but
yeah.
that's what I mean. It's not like how FPS games are moving forward. It's just a very particular execution of an idea.
I really hope another developer tries that concept again. I feel like we won't see another one of those for a long
Uh,
time.
Proteus does it a little bit, like with the way the games work, but it's far easier than Doom Eternal.
Yeah.
Ultra Kill has similar pacing to Doom Eternal, and in fact, it has similar combat arena gameplay style. But if I enjoy Ultra Kill a lot more because it's far lower on complexity and resource
Yeah.
management. You have a far smaller roster of weapons, so it's more about using that roster of weapons more efficiently than just constantly cycling through 12 different things.
Mm.
So there are games that have definitely drawn from Doom Eternal. I'm sure they'll continue to do so. Uh, but yeah, I guess we're probably going to have to wait for Doom Eternal 2 or Doom 3 or whatever they want to call
I'm
it.
really interested to see where the next game goes. I
How
hope
can they
they
make it more complicated? Like, it's hard because
well, I don't think they will. I think they'll try and hit a middle ground of
yeah,
both
the thing is,
games.
the step up from 2016 to Eternal is just absurd. Like, you
Gigantic.
can't just
Yeah.
do that again. It's hard. It's almost like I feel they need to drop it for 5 to 10 years and then do it again.
Do it
Yeah,
again, but more
yeah.
refined. Yeah.
Just be happy with what Doom Eternal is.
At least fix your aesthetic. God, that was
It
bad. It's
was.
such a drop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you hopeful for what's coming next, James, or do you think that it's going to be indies continuing to lead the charge for innovation?
Disco Elysium was the third game probably in that. They're not big, but
Disco is an
I
indie
think
game, I think.
it's an
Yeah.
indie game, but it does feel like it's polished. I'm pretty hopeful. I do think indie games are going to lead the charge for a while. I think we're going to get lots of like janky games that get picked up by big publishers
Mhm.
and turned into real games.
And I think
Or
that's
real games, you know what I
I mean,
mean?
I think that's fine as well. I mean, Valve did that with Portal. Like Portal was a
Yeah,
student
and
project. Yeah.
Dota and
I
yeah.
basically I guess how I feel about this is that and I've kind of mentioned this before, but I'm okay for the AAA gaming space to not be aimed at me anymore. It doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I think innovation is inevitable too.
Yeah.
Like what's going to happen? Like, okay, for the next 10 years, there is zero innovation, and during that 10 years, not a single person is going to be like, this is boring, I'm going to try something crazy. Like, if innovation, like, if stagnation happens, there's going to be pushback eventually,
And
right?
one of the
So,
ways stagnation happens is if there's a significant cost to entry, and that was true before, particularly when it came to graphics engines. Nowadays, way more people can make video games, so no one's there's not that cost to entry nowadays.
I'm so fascinated by the rise of AI image generation in the last 6 months or so. I think we're going to see people trying, like people who aren't artists, trying to make games with that, and nothing but programming knowledge,
God,
basically.
I can just
Can you?
imagine the lawsuits. Oh my god.
Yeah, yeah, it's very
Well,
fascinating because, like, if you train your model using these images, like, are you liable for that? But it's an original image that looks nothing like
well,
them.
I don't know. I'm honestly, it's very confusing because
Can you even prove they used this in the model? Like,
I don't know. I think you're completely right, James, and I'm gonna sit back with popcorn and wait for the shit show to unfold. Okay, final question, from Rosso Dude, and this is a good question from him because Rosso Dude is a modder for many of the immersive sims that I love. System Shock 2, which I haven't played, but I will force James to play one day. Deus Ex. He's even recently started dabbling in Pathologic 1 modding. So
really
he's
nice.
like very light dabble, like he's literally just started. So I've been plaguing him with suggestions that he's been rightfully ignoring. So his question is, what are the best contributions modders can make in preserving and expanding on old games? Do you ever bother with mods that change gameplay or add content in your own time, not just a podcast? Or do you stick purely to patches and quality of life improvements?
Yes, I basically stick to that stuff. I have a huge problem with mods where if I can notice the mod in the game, it breaks my immersion so hard. Like, it basically, the mod has to be like as high quality as the original or better for me to not uninstall it immediately. So basically, like when we played through Resident Evil 4, that mod is like a masterpiece of effort and design and time,
Hmm.
which is an unrealistic expectation for the vast majority of mods, which can add quality of life features without it being intrusive or noticeable. Like, obviously, when you add the mod into your game, but back in the day when I would play like Oblivion and Morrowind and try to mod them, they're kind of like janky shit that, like, like you could add Cloud's Buster Sword to Morrowind. Like
Or the
stuff,
portal gun or whatever,
yeah,
yeah.
stuff like that. I'm like, I just don't care for this at all.
On a first playthrough, I will mostly go for quality of life fixes, and bug fixes. I will say that if the consensus in the community is that a game is improved by a mod significantly,
Yeah.
then I would probably play with that mod. And I think that that's particularly true for games like Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Like, did we? I can't remember. Did we just play with the quality of
Actually,
life,
yeah,
or
we did play with the quality of life. I would
yeah,
actually play the new content for that game, actually. The mod
yeah?
for that looks really cool.
I think stuff like that where I guess there's this weird strategic balance, but that's a rarity. I will say that for me, in terms of like those significant mods which change gameplay, I think they mostly exist once you've already finished the game. It's
Yeah.
like post game content. I've played multiple mods for Deus Ex, for example, on repeat playthroughs. Don't think I've played Rosso's unless I accidentally did, but that's next on the list. I'll also say I think there is something a bit loaded about this question, which is that on some level, it's not up to me or people in general to decide or hold judgment on what modders do to games. Like, if you are creating a mod for a game and you have a vision for that game to I guess play differently in the same way that any creator is creating a video game, I shouldn't be able to tell you you should be modding the game in this way and not other ways. Do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you whether I think it's good or not. But I won't, we shouldn't be telling you what to do. Whether you want to do quality of life fixes or do dramatic changes or whatever, go fucking wild. And I'll judge you or won't judge you. But yeah, I don't think as a community, we should be standing in judgment of what modders should do. Modders should do whatever the fuck they want and then let the chips fall where they may.
That definitely is this feeling I get when I see crazy mods that would have taken the person years to make, only for it to get like taken down by Nintendo or whatever. And I'm like, man, if you had just made your own game in that time, you'd be loaded, and you wouldn't be like in legal issues. there's like a level of effort there where it's just not worth it to me, I guess.
But that's the thing, and that's part of why I feel like it's wrong for me to be dictating to modders what they do. Like, these are labors of love.
Yes.
Mods are free. They've always been free. Like,
not
insane.
if Bethesda has anything to do with it.
Not if Gabe Newell has anything to do with it. Oh my god, do you remember all that?
Oh my god.
That did not go down too well. But yeah, at the end of the day, modders should do whatever the hell they want, and you know, as players and members of the community, we can stand in judgment of them. But if modders want to add, you know, fedoras and monocles to their games, to all the characters, then so be it. There's no sense of responsibility on what they should or shouldn't be doing. Doors open, go nuts. You know, like I think the more freedom modders have to do what they want to do to a game, to change it, the better.
Yes.
And I think we're done, James.
Oh my god, really?
Holy shit.
We're only 2 hours and 40 minutes in.
Yeah, just a nice short episode, but you know, this is the mailbag tradition. Oh my god, thank you so much to everyone for sticking with us through this long journey discussing all these different topics. Thank you so much to our Discord users for their incredible questions. I've really enjoyed talking about this stuff that I don't usually get to, but which definitely informs a lot of what I say on the show, and it's literally not possible without you. So thank you for the great questions, and thank you for sticking with us all this time. If you're a listener and you are enjoying the show, we would love to have you come by our Discord server and join up and say hello, and, you know, start getting those questions ready for next year.
As for me, I would absolutely recommend Mailbag 4 as a game.
Yeah, Mailbag 4 has advantages and disadvantages, but on balance, it's well worth your time.
I think it's held up pretty well, actually.
It's held up as of, you know, recording several years ago. Maybe we need to review our previous Mailbags. Yeah, Mailbag 1 was pretty good, but Mailbag 2, give that one a miss.
Yeah. This is the episode 99, which marks the end of the first part of our show. From episode 100 onwards, we'll be replaying the games in the exact order, and then re-listening to our reviews, and then looking up if our reviews.
We've got this brilliant formula, and we're going to stick to it. Yeah, all those games again.
Oh, can't wait for Luna.
I can wait. Yeah, so thank you. And yeah, I guess it's time for us to talk about the big 100, because we've cheated, and because we always do these mailbag episodes. This is episode 99.5, so we could save episode 100. James, we've mentioned it a few times, but tell the world, what are we doing for episode 100?
Well, we're of course playing Pathologic 2. We were very excited to talk about the first game. Definitely, like, narratively my favorite game that we've done. Gameplay-wise, could be improved a lot. So I really wanted to play 2, because I was like, I hear they fixed the gameplay, and I'm like, if they fix the gameplay and keep the plot intact, it could probably be my favorite game ever. So super keen to see how that one pans out. Although I do worry that, because a lot of the appeal of the first game was being lost in this strange world, I'm going to understand everything, and that's going to be a problem.
I'm kind of jealous of you, James, because you get to experience a completely new narrative, because you got to do The Bachelor for our Pathologic playthrough.
Yes.
Whereas, and I'm sure there are plenty of changes to the Harrispecs to make it interesting, but it is a little bit of retreading old ground for me. I will say I've started playing this, and the way that the quests work is radically different. Like, it's it's just completely different. So I can at least say it's not just that they, you know, improved the first person combat. They've put some serious thought into redesigning the systems that govern this game. So I'm very excited to give it a fair crack and see if it can fulfill the promise of what the first game seemed to be trying to achieve.
I will say, having played a bit of it already, I think the soundtrack's a downgrade already. Maybe that's something mods can fix.
From
just put the original
From
back in.
speaking to the team over on Rosso's server, the consensus is that Pathologic One's OST is definitely more enjoyable in the abstract, but the Pathologics 2 can add a lot to the immersion and tension in the moment to moment feel, and maybe that's something that will sink in as we get our teeth into it.
I hope so.
But we'll see. That's just the general consensus I've heard.
All right, well, we'll see you guys in probably 2 weeks for Pathologic 2. Look forward to it.
See you in 3 weeks. Happy New Year.